Chapter 307. Her actions scared Long Qingting Shui to death. She felt her body falling down the cliff uncontrollably. This scene fell into Hidden Sword's eyes. He could no longer control himself and shouted, "I'll talk. I'll talk." Long Qingting Shui's arm was pulled by Gong Yimo. Her entire body fell towards the cliff. At that moment, the cold wind blew against her face, blowing her long hair back. Her face instantly turned pale. She could see the giant steps under the cliff and the surging Longting River. This sudden drop and impact made her brain suddenly dizzy. Fortunately, Gong Emo was holding on to her tightly. Otherwise, she would have fallen down by now. Gong Emo glanced at him. "Speak." Hidden Sword closed his eyes deeply. I was sent by Lu Yi. And? Gong Yimo slightly frowned and said impatiently, "Are you her man?" Hidden Sword glanced at the little princess and saw that she was scared silly at this time, unable to speak at all. His expression flashed a trace of unbearable. "I am the little princess man. My name is Hidden Sword. I'm the junior brother of the person you killed, Zhang Xiao." He knew that Gong Yimo wanted to force him to admit that he was the little princess man, so he admitted it, hoping that Gong Yimo would let the little princess go. He also wanted to say that he came to harm Gong Yimo not because of the little princess, but because he resented Gong Yimo for killing his senior brother, so he did it. But after Gong Yimo got his answer, she suddenly smiled. She loosened her foot and Hidden Sword was caught off guard and fell back. Then in the moment he did not react, Gong Yimo kicked away his other hand. His body was in the air and he suddenly opened his eyes wide. No! He only had time to let out a hurried cry and his whole body fell down the cliff. He probably died with his eyes wide open. Hidden Sword's death finally made Long Qingting Shui come back to her senses. At this time, she finally said to Gong Yimo with some anger, "Are you satisfied now?" Gong Yimo yawned. "I don't know what you mean. I didn't want him to die. He wanted to commit suicide. I'm just helping him." After saying that, he actually dragged her onto the altar. Gong Yimo's decisive kick just now made everyone's hair stand on end. Even if there was no more fighting, they still didn't dare to gather around. But Gong Yimo didn't care and directly said to Gong Qing, "Imperial Father, I will personally send her back to her country and seek justice from King Lu Yi." Now that Gong Yimo no longer wanted to kill her, Long Qingting Shui finally regained some courage. Because of her extreme anger, a mocking expression appeared on her face. "Send me back to my country. Gong Yimo, you're making me confess under torture." The more she spoke, the angrier she got. "That person just now was indeed my subordinate, but he wasn't ordered by me. It's because you killed his senior brother that he became like this. Since you have such a high-sounding reason, why didn't you say it before?" Gong Yimo calmly asked. Long Qingting Shui's face turned red. She was still tied up at this time and her mind was in a mess. "Because I'm afraid you'll misunderstand that I sent him." Her words lacked confidence. Gong Yimo had countless reasons to refute her, but at this time, she was too lazy to argue with her. The corner of her mouth twitched as she said, "Okay, but if you say one more word, I'll give you another stab in the face." This sentence directly made Long Qingting Shui angry, but she trembled and didn't dare to speak again. Gong Qing also felt that Gong Yimo's actions were a bit too much. After all, the two countries still wanted to cooperate. They were in the right, so they should stop. If they really made a big deal out of it, would they start a war over such a small matter? But Gong Yimo insisted. She even knelt down with a cold and solemn expression. "Imperial Father. This isn't the first time. They slandered me and humiliated me both times during the conferring ceremony and this time during the conferring ceremony. If I don't ask them clearly about this matter, they will think that my Daiyu state is afraid of them. Gong Cheng was a little angry, but it's not as serious as being sent back to the country. Is this breaking off relations? As soon as he finished speaking, a minister quickly echoed, "Yes, Princess, we know that you've been wronged, but the marriage between the two countries is a good thing. How can you destroy the contract between the two countries because of a moment of anger? Princess is a bit too selfish." They spoke one after another, as if they were all righteous and she was the one who was making trouble without reason. Gong Yimo looked at them coldly and suddenly stood up. At this time, her hair was loose and her clothes were a little messy, but no one thought that she was in a sorry state. Because she stood there, the suppressed anger made people shut up. "Speak, why don't you speak?" she asked with a calm face and a smile. "When she sent that person to humiliate me, why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you speak up for me?" The more she spoke, the colder she became. In the end, the anger was so strong that it was suffocating. "Not only did you not stand on my side, but you suspected me because of an outsider. Is it a good thing for Daiyu state if my reputation is ruined? Is this how you love your country?" No one dared to answer her. At this time, the people who advised her to consider the big picture all shrank back. They couldn't wait to disappear from Gong Yimo's sight. Mor. The emperor felt that her appearance was very scary. Her whole body was emitting a pressure that kept people away. But when she looked at him, he couldn't say a word. "When I was humiliated, as a citizen of Daiyu state, did you help me? Why do I have to endure when I'm wronged and disregard the big picture when I resist?" Gong Yimo's gaze swept across the crowd. Everyone avoided her gaze. Other than fear in their hearts, there was also a trace of guilt. They suddenly felt that their previous behavior seemed to be a little too much. "Now, it's fine if you don't seek justice for me. But when I seek justice for myself, you want to stop me. I really want to know why." Gong Yimo's eyes finally glared at Emperor Gongqing, forcing him to take a step back. "Imperial Father, I admit that I've done a lot for Daiyu state ever since I became sensible. I don't dare to say that it's all because of the good weather these past few years, but at least half of it, right?" She looked at the officials again. "And all of you, aren't you eating and wearing much better than before? Haven't your families become much wealthier because of the convenience of the water route? Is it because your lives are better, so you have the strength to find fault with me?" She suddenly looked up to the sky and laughed, her expression full of ridicule. "They say that you should never forget the person who dug the well when drinking water. Is this how you treat me? When I gave, I didn't refuse. When I was humiliated, I looked on coldly from the sidelines. You doubted me and wronged me. Now that the truth is out, because I'm a princess, you have to consider the big picture, and you want me to endure. Since that's the case, this princess, it's fine if I don't want to be." As she spoke, she suddenly reached out to take off the shaky crown on her head and fiercely smashed it on the ground. Chapter 308. This scene stunned everyone, including Gong Dai. Gong Dai's heart ached. He knew that the royal sister was using this method to divert their attention and make them forget about the affair between her and her younger brother. So she was making herself sad and forcing them to feel guilty. But every word she said was true. Why did the royal sister have to give so much? Wasn't it enough for them to enjoy themselves? Why did they have to make trouble for her? At this moment, he really wanted to take Gong Yimo away from this place and leave all these troubles behind. Or he could just rebel and suppress everyone who went against her. But he couldn't, because that wasn't the situation she wanted to see. If she wanted to rebel, she would have said so directly. She must have her reasons for making such a choice. So he endured it, but he would definitely make these people pay the price. Gong Yimo's hair fluttered. At this moment, there was no sadness in her expression, only self-mockery. But everyone could feel her sorrow. Yes, she had used this method to resolve this situation. Although she had resolved it, she had finally realized the gap between her and Gong Dai. Just now, Gong Dai had mobilized the Imperial Guards for her. The Imperial Guards had listened to him, but not the Emperor's orders. Just this alone was enough to make him guilty of rebellion. All his hard work over the years would be for naught, unless he really rebelled. And all of this was because of her. It was already so difficult for them to admit their feelings, so how could they talk about love? So she did this to make the Emperor feel guilty so that Gong Dai's actions would fade away. Secondly, she wanted to divert attention so that people would forget about the rumor of her having an affair with her younger brother. Thirdly, she wanted to leave, the sooner the better. Her sad expression made Gong Cheng's heart ache. She wasn't wrong. Because of her actions, not to mention other places in Daiyu State, at least in the capital, the entire standard of living had been raised. But what were these people doing? When she was in trouble, not only did they look on coldly from the sidelines, some people even found fault with her time and time again. In comparison, they really had no conscience. As for the commoners who weren't scared away, they felt even more guilty after hearing her words. Gong Yimo was the person who had directly changed their lives. She was their benefactor. But for such a good person, when they heard others slandering her, they actually doubted her and thought in their hearts, so she's not perfect and has an ugly side. From the looks of it, these people were even uglier. Not knowing how to repay kindness, echoing the opinions of others, and looking on coldly from the sidelines, from a certain point of view, this was even more hateful than the perpetrator. Gong Cheng was stunned by Gong Yimo's move and couldn't recover for a long time. At this moment, her skirt and hair fluttered in the wind. The crown that symbolized power and status was thrown to the ground by her, as if it were a pair of worn-out shoes. She was undoubtedly powerful, and the power that extended from her straight back could even pierce through the heavens and earth. But she was also weak. She would be hurt by the doubts of the world. She would throw her crown to the ground out of anger. She was really heartbroken. Her bloody right hand trembled slightly, hiding the turmoil in her heart. Thinking about how they had looked at such a woman with doubtful eyes and coldly watched such a woman being bullied, they were really unworthy of being men. Gong Che was the first to react. Although he really wished that Gong Yimo wasn't his sister, it wasn't in such a way. Seeing her sad was also very painful for him. Therefore, he stood up, picked up Gong Yimo's crown, and said, "Royal sister's character is clear, the sun and moon can bear witness to it. But you all slandered her and slandered her for having an affair with this prince. Since that's the case, in order to not let Daiyu State's reputation be tarnished, this prince will also not be the crown prince." His words shocked everyone. It was impossible for him to not be the crown prince. No one was more suitable than him. Gong Dai didn't say anything. He just stood beside Gong Yimo. No matter what royal sister wanted to do, he would support her unconditionally. This was something that both of them knew very well. Kim Yoon saw this scene and couldn't help but take a few steps back. Originally, when Long Qingting Shui came to find him and asked him to join forces with her to separate Gong Dai and Gong Yimo, he refused. But he still had a trace of ambition in his heart. What if Long Qingting Shui succeeded? Mo clearly saw that Gong Dai wasn't someone worth trusting. Then, wouldn't he have a chance? So, he didn't tell Gong Yimo about this matter. But he didn't expect Long Qingting Shui to be so bold and so vicious. And at such a time, such a thing had to happen. For him to even speak up for her was a reason to tarnish her reputation. Kim Yoon regretted it very much. If only he had told Mo earlier, she wouldn't have to suffer such a sudden blow. It was all his fault. Unfortunately, it was too late to regret. Seeing the crown prince say such words and Gong Dai standing beside Gong Yimo, everyone panicked. Their gazes couldn't help but fall on Long Qingting Shue's body with probing. It's just sending her back to her country. There will be a time when the two countries will cooperate again. But there is only one crown prince and such a good princess. More importantly, even if Gong Dai was suspected by the emperor because he exposed himself today, it doesn't mean that he will lose power because of this. If they don't do anything, in the future when Gong Dai solves his own problem and comes back to take revenge, they won't be able to resist. Seeing their gazes fall on her body, Long Qingting Shui, who originally thought that she was finally safe, suddenly opened her eyes wide. Are you really going to send me back to my country? But no one answered her. She shouted after the shock. No. I don't want to go back. I don't want to go back. If she were to go back like this, she would definitely become the laughing stock of the entire Lu Yi. The commoners didn't understand the twists and turns of the upper class. They just followed their hearts. Now that they felt guilty, they actually knelt down spontaneously. We are guilty. Please forgive us, princess. These voices that were full of guilt suddenly moved Gong Yimo. She raised her head and looked at them. When the commoners knelt down, the imperial guards also knelt down. Princess, please crown us again. We won't abandon Dai Yu state. They really felt that if Gong Yimo wasn't the princess, it would definitely be Dai Yu state's loss. So they shouted again, Princess, please crown us again. We won't abandon Dai Yu state. There was a trace of sadness in the deafening voices. They sincerely hoped that Gong Yimo could stay and be their princess again. When the officials saw this, some were forced by the situation, while some were willing to kneel down. Princess, please retract your order, we won't abandon Dai Yu state. Gong Yimo glanced at them. At this time, except for a few specific people, everyone was kneeling down. The entire altar was filled with their pleading voices. It was a world of difference from when they were suspicious of her and looked on coldly from the sidelines. She smiled coldly. Chapter 309. Long Qingting Shui was frightened. She looked around, but found that no one was looking at her. Are you crazy? I'm Lu Ye's most favored princess. Are you forcing me, Lu Yi, to go to war with Dai Yu state? But her voice didn't get any response. Everyone was devoutly worshipping the other woman. At this moment, her heart was like dead ashes. How could this be? She didn't expect Gong Yimo to be such a person who couldn't be provoked. But it's fine if she can't be provoked, but killing Hidden Sword wasn't enough. Why did she have to kill her? She didn't even think about it. If she was convicted of instigating the Hidden Sword sect, then she would be a princess who had an affair with many men. She even had an affair with her brother. Gong Yimo's reputation would be ruined. What was the difference between that and death? Emperor Gong felt quite uncomfortable. In his opinion, Gong Yimo had always been very strong. She seemed to be unbeatable, so he always felt that some blows were not worth mentioning to Mo. But now, he suddenly realized. No matter how strong she was still a little girl. She also had things that she couldn't accept. So being slandered and questioned was her reverse scale. Thinking of this, he whispered. Mo. Don't be angry, this matter. He glanced at Long Qingting Shui and made up his mind, since you want to send her back to her country, fine. But don't say things like not being a princess. Unexpectedly, Gong Yimo shook her head. Father, you don't understand. I'm tired of being a princess. She bluntly said such words, making Gong Cheng's face pale and speechless. Since I returned to my country, big and small matters have been constantly happening. I don't think I'm a person who takes the initiative to scheme against others or cause trouble. But this time, I really feel tired, just like this altar. She laughed mockingly. The altar that all of you regard as an honor is nothing more than a wooden plank in my eyes. However, so many people are forcing their fantasies onto me, thinking that I'm blocking their path. This is really boring. Seeing that she was about to turn around and leave, everyone present became anxious. Princess, please do not abandon Daiyu State. Daiyu State needs you. Someone shouted. If there are any more rumors in the future, we will definitely distinguish between right and wrong. Princess, don't leave. Even Gong Qing had never dealt with such a thing. Mor. What do I have to do to make you stay? Gong Qing sighed, you're sad, but don't tell me you don't even want Imperial Father anymore. His words made Gong Yimo's departing figure pause, but she never looked back. Seeing that there was hope, Gong Qing hurriedly said, Mor, I've wronged you all these years. Tell me, I'll agree to anything you want. Gong Yimo fell silent. At this moment, she really wanted to leave, but she couldn't. Her current status was equivalent to the Crown Prince of Daiyu State. She had both power and influence. Whatever she wanted to do, she could achieve twice the results with half the effort. She did not want to give up. Moreover, if she left just like that, wouldn't it benefit Long Chang's Tingshui? What would happen to Gong Dai? The Emperor would not let him off. Even if he defeated the Emperor in the end, he would probably be cursed. Gong Che also said, Imperial sister, tell me. Why hurt yourself for an outsider? Gong Yimo turned back and gritted her teeth, agree to anything. She looked at Gong Qing suspiciously. Gong Qing nodded repeatedly, yes, Mor. Tell me. She looked conflicted, as if she was in a difficult position. In the end, she stretched out 3 fingers. First, I want Imperial Father to not blame the Imperial Guards. They were brought up by Gong Dai, and they were worried about me. That's why they didn't listen to you. If you blame them, we won't talk about this anymore. She said softly. Gong Qing was angry and amused. Originally, he was prepared to demote all of these people. Did he want to die by keeping disobedient people by his side? However, Gong Yimo did not look like she was joking. Forget it, forget it. At worst, he would find someone else to lead the Imperial Guards in the future. So he nodded. Second, you can't blame Gong Dai. Gong Yimo said seriously, Gong Dai did this for me. You can't blame him for the deep feelings between us. This made Gong Qing a little hesitant. Because just a moment ago, he wanted to remove Gong Dai from his position first. It was too dangerous. With his influence in the Imperial Guards. But now, Gong Yimo asked him not to take action against Gong Dai. Wasn't this making things difficult for him? Which emperor could tolerate this? Gong Yimo naturally knew what he was thinking and said sadly. Imperial Father, you're too suspicious. That's why you suspect me when others say it. Whenever there's anything that you can't control, you want to kill me. She said the word kill very self-deprecatingly. She was referring to how she faked her death to escape. Now, you also suspect Gong Dai. She couldn't help but look up and ask, don't you know what kind of person I am? Don't you know how Gong Dai treats you? In your heart, have you really trusted anyone? Her tone was very fast and aggressive. It made Gong Chang's ears buzz. He didn't trust anyone. Gong Yimo smiled and shook her head, the world slandered me, scolded me, humiliated me, and looked down on me. I don't feel uncomfortable. But even you don't believe me. What's the point of me staying here? Her words were very simple. But for so many years, no one had ever said this to Gong Qing. As an emperor, he must think a lot and be suspicious. Does he need someone to truly trust? At this time, Gong Dai timely said, "Imperial Father, I don't have the ambition to become an emperor. Now, at the altar, I swear on my life that in this life, I will not covet your throne." He just wants to be a prince that no one can control and then run away with royal sister. Gong Yimo and Gong Dai's words were a two-sided attack. Gong Qing couldn't help but hold his head in pain. In the end, it was Chang Shi who gave in to him. "Your Majesty, the late emperor once said that an emperor should be good at using people, and should not be suspicious of using people. You see, these are all your children. Each and every one of them is well behaved. What else do you have to worry about? It's me who is too rigid." Gong Qing suddenly opened his mouth. It was unknown whether he was telling others or telling himself. He gave a long sigh. "All right. Jean agrees to the second matter." Gong Yimo smiled. "The third matter is that I want to personally send Long Cheng's Ting Shui back to her country. She said to everyone, at this time, because of me, I should be the one to solve it. I won't cause discord between the two countries because of personal grudges. So, I will personally solve this matter." Gong Dai suddenly glanced at Gong Yimo, but didn't say anything. Gong Yimo's words were naturally what Gong Qing wished for. "Good child, Jean agrees. It's just that Dai Yu State is in the right in this matter. You just need to seek justice. Even if we break off in the end, Jean and Dai Yu State are not afraid. Thank you, Imperial Father, for your benevolence." Gong Qing finally showed a trace of a tired smile. "In that case, why aren't you wearing the ceremonial hat? And Che, you too. Do you think you can discard the crown prince just because you say so? If this happens again, Jin will definitely punish you severely. Now, wear the crown for Chapter 310. Gong Che looked at the golden crown in his hand and finally let out a sigh of relief. "Yes, father." He looked at Gong Yimo and his heart was once again filled with admiration for her. It was just like the first time he met her. She was like a demon overflowing with murderous aura, sitting motionless in the cold palace with corpses all over the ground and her little face stained with blood. She was so different from the rest. "Sister, this prince will put on the crown for you." Gong Yimo sighed and lowered her head. A wise man submits to circumstances. She was never a person who would act in a moment of anger. If there was a shortcut, why wouldn't she take it? Seeing that the murderous aura in her eyes had dissipated, she finally lowered her head. At that moment, she seemed to have returned to that docile and kind princess, and not the female Yama who seemed to be able to destroy heaven and earth when she was enraged. It was really strange. Why did it not feel strange when two completely different characteristics appeared on her? When the golden crown was put on her head, Gong Yimo heard cheers. She turned to look and felt that these people seemed to be happy from the bottom of their hearts. Compared to before, they showed two different expressions. At that moment, she seemed to have understood something. People were ignorant, and it was human nature to be biased. Since that was the case, why not be the one to guide their thoughts? In her previous life, she did not play with these thoughts, but not playing with them did not mean that she did not know how to. After putting on the ceremonial crown, she calmly looked around. At this moment, everyone was bowing down to worship her. At this moment, she smiled, as if there was a different kind of emotion in her heart. Then, she suddenly took off the largest eastern pearl on her crown. Everyone was confused. At this moment, they heard her holding the pearl up high, closed her eyes and said, "Sacrifice to the heavens, receive benefits from the earth." Now that the Grand Canal has been formed, with the pearl as the seal, may this river flow forever, and the heavens blessed the future generations. She was actually saying the oath that the Holy Maiden had to say during the conferring ceremony. She walked to the edge of the cliff and threw the pearl in her hand down. The pearl hit the stone wall and flashed a stream of light, making a dull sound, and then disappeared in an instant. That valuable pearl, just like that, disappeared into the surging Longting River. She closed her eyes and turned around with a smile. The conferring ceremony has been completed. Bestow the earth with a bright pearl, and the heavens bless the future. The name of this canal is Zhe Tian. Her words caused joy to appear on the faces of the originally silent crowd. They bowed and kowtowed. The pearl seals the earth, and the heavens bless the future generations. Daiyu State is mighty. Prosper and prosper. Daiyu State is mighty. Prosper and prosper. His voice reverberated through the mountains like waves, causing everyone's hearts to surge. A sense of pride arose from patriotism and national honor. No matter what happened in the past, their mood now was rising. Grateful and pious. Then, the ministers stood up and threw the pearls down the sky ladder one by one. The commoners threw down the little things they had made. There was food, and there were also things they loved. They all represented their feelings for the gods. When the last person finished, the thrilling ceremony finally came to an end. On the way back, Gong Yimo sat in the carriage with her eyes closed. At this time, her hand was simply bandaged. Although she had medicine in her space, she didn't know why she didn't apply it because she wanted it to hurt. At this time, someone suddenly entered her carriage. It gave Gong Yimo a fright. When she saw that it was Gong Dai, she felt her heart beat faster. Can't he restrain himself after what happened just now? Gong Dai knew that she was afraid, so he spoke first. It was the emperor who asked me to come. Perhaps it was out of guilt or to show his trust, but the emperor actually asked Gong Dai to comfort her. Gong Yimo didn't say anything and closed her eyes to rest. At this time, her face was a little pale and she was in a sorry state. There was a weak beauty to her that made Gong Dai want to hug her. However, she had just been agitated, so he couldn't do that. Just now, there was a moment when he thought of directly usurping the throne. The ministers and emperor were all there, and the imperial guards only listened to his orders. Once he gave the order, the imperial guards outside wouldn't have time to react, and he would be able to control the situation. Those who followed him would prosper, and those who opposed him would perish. With such a good opportunity, he could easily become the emperor. Moreover, if he didn't do it this time, it would be difficult to do it in the future. Even if the emperor didn't pursue the matter, he would be on guard against him. It wouldn't be so easy. However, he didn't do it because she wasn't willing, and because he didn't have any rebellious thoughts all this time, he missed this opportunity. She wasn't willing. She never had the ambition to annex any country, and she also had some feelings for the emperor. She felt that he was a good emperor, and there was no need for him to do such a thing for his own selfish reasons and cause unrest in the country. However, he was a little shaken at that moment. Previously, he only wanted to be a prince with real power and travel the world with her. But just now, when he saw Gong Yimo being bullied, he was in a dilemma. Why couldn't he be the emperor? If he became the emperor, he would definitely protect her. She could do whatever she wanted, and no one would dare to say anything. He just wanted to be with her. However, when he saw her bitterly arguing for the sake of her reputation without showing any desire to destroy everything, he couldn't help but suppress his thoughts and not do anything. There was no need for him to go to that step. That step would hurt her. The two of them didn't speak. At this moment, the carriage jolted, and Gong Yimo suddenly let out a muffled groan. Gong Dai saw that her wound was bleeding again. Although he didn't dare to touch her at this time, he couldn't bear to see her in pain. He took out a bottle of medicine and reached out to hold Gong Yimo's hand. "What are you doing?" She retracted her hand like a frightened rabbit. Because she had touched her wound, a thin layer of cold sweat appeared on her forehead, but she still looked at him warily. This reaction made his heart ache. He was still too weak. His influence was limited to Dai Yu state. Whatever Lu Ye's people wanted to do, he had to be passive. That was why the current situation had happened, and why Gong Yimo was injured. He closed his eyes. When he opened them again, there was a trace of determination in his cold eyes. "Royal sister, I won't touch you. I promise you that before I have absolute power, I won't force you anymore." His heart ached. He had finally forced her to this point, but because he couldn't bear to see her afraid, he had to give in. Gong Yimo looked at him blankly and spoke after a while. "Are you serious?" Gong Dai smiled with a pale face. She really couldn't take it anymore and only wanted to retreat. He touched the hair on her temples with his fingertips and pulled all the strands behind her head. "Really? But we have to make a promise." Gong Yimo opened her eyes and looked at him. At that moment, her guard gradually dropped. Gong Dai smiled bitterly. "I want you to promise that you won't fall in love with anyone other than me. Can you do that?" Chapter 311. Seeing that she didn't answer, Gong Dai pursed his lips, opened her injured palm, and lowered his head to apply medicine for her. At 16 years old, he was between maturity and inexperience. When he restrained all his hostility and calmed down to do something, he was simply harmless. However, Gong Yimo could feel that his heart was not calm at this moment, and it was stronger than ever. After applying the medicine, he carefully bandaged Gong Yimo's hand and calmly placed it on the cushion. "Royal sister, I'm useless. No wonder you don't like me." As he said these words, he laughed silently. He actually laid sideways on Gong Yimo's lap, with a trace of self-loathing between his eyebrows. The self-deprecation and self-blame in his tone made Gong Yimo's heart suddenly hurt. How many years had it been since he was like this? Just like that, he lay on her lap quietly, with a trace of dependence and affection. Gong Yimo's hand couldn't help but fall on his crown, gently stroking his hair. "You're already very outstanding." Gong Dai didn't say anything. His head gently rubbed against her leg, deeply inhaling the scent of her body, like an injured beast, quietly licking its wounds. Gong Yimo knew that he was hit by the incident with Ting Shui in Dragon City today. He realized that his power was only in one country, while she was already going to a second country. Was he a little sad? "How old are you?" Gong Dai hated it when she talked about him like this. He couldn't help but gently bite her thigh. That hot and itchy feeling made Gong Yimo let out a clear laugh. "I'm serious." She pressed his head, not letting him move. In the past, Gong Dai had always been strong and aggressive. However, when he revealed such a quiet and hurt side for the first time, she finally couldn't help but speak her mind. "In my heart, you've always been the most powerful man." Her words made Gong Dai suddenly stop moving. He quietly lay on her lap, listening to her speak. "When you were very, very young, 7 years old, right? At that time, you could make a swing and a rocking chair for me. As long as I told you once, you could make it based on your own guesses. You didn't look like a 7-year-old child at all. You learned everything I taught you once. You were simply a child prodigy." Gong Dai was silent. He didn't think that having a photographic memory or being born with three-dimensional thinking was something amazing. If he was a child prodigy, then the royal sister who taught him these things was a god. Gong Yimo ran her fingers through his hair to massage the top of his head. She could clearly feel Gong Dai's entire body relax, and she couldn't help but smile. "Also, when you were 9 years old, there was an assassin in the cold palace. I asked you to ask Imperial Father for help. At that time, I was actually prepared to stall the assassin and let you escape. At that time, I didn't think that you, who was only 9 years old, could really call for help." Gong Yimo smiled bitterly. There were some things that she didn't tell Gong Dai later on because Gong Dai felt very guilty about her injury, so she buried it in her heart, thinking that she would never talk about it in this lifetime. However, now, on the way back to the palace, she wanted to tell him. Gong Dai suddenly opened his eyes to look at her. Gong Yimo quickly covered his eyes and smiled awkwardly. "Don't look. It said that a woman's angle is the ugliest." Gong Dai's initial shock and heartache were swept away. He didn't know why, but he suddenly wanted to laugh. The royal sister actually cared a lot about her image in his heart. At that time, when I saw those assassins calling for help, I felt that I was going to die here. However, there were 2 of us, so one of us dying is definitely better than both of us dying. So I chased you away and asked you to look for the Emperor. Actually, I hoped that the Emperor would not kill you on account of you being his son and would protect you. Gong Yimo finished speaking in a low voice. Even she was a little surprised. At that time, she was actually so selfless that she wanted to give up her third life so easily, just so that Gong Dai could leave. Based on her understanding of the Emperor, she knew that the Emperor would definitely not kill Gong Dai. As long as he appeared in front of the Emperor, he would be able to live. As for whether she would die or not, at that time, she really didn't think too much about it. When Gong Dai heard this, he couldn't help but reach out to hug her. His slender body curled up on the couch, the tip of his nose pressed against the softness of her abdomen, and he sighed deeply. How could he not be afraid? At that time, he was really afraid that if he couldn't find help, then she would die. Later on, he didn't dare to think about what would have happened if he hadn't seen the Emperor at that time, if she had died at that time because she wanted to save him, and he was powerless to save her. He really couldn't imagine what his life would be like in the future. Feeling that he was hugging her in fear because he was recalling the past, Gong Yimo giggled. Suddenly, she felt as if she had returned to the cold palace, the feeling of relying on each other. You might not know, but at that time, if you hadn't arrived in time, the one who would have died would have been me. At that time, I had already used up all my strength, and I might have been stabbed into a sieve by those assassins in the next moment, but you came. Not only did you pass through the layers of palace defenses to see the Emperor, you really brought people to save me. At that moment, I really thought that you were super powerful, and didn't seem like a 9-year-old child at all. At that time, I swore that I would definitely treat you well because my life was saved by you. So even though I was about to faint at that time, I bit the tip of my tongue and endured it. I wanted to fight for our lives. Luckily, we both survived. Gong Dai couldn't hold it in anymore and hugged her to the couch. In Gong Yimo's carriage, there was a very big couch that they could sleep on. But Gong Dai didn't do anything, he just hugged her and rested his head on her neck, absorbing every bit of gentleness from her body. This was the person he loved to the marrow of his bones. The neck was also a sensitive spot, but because Gong Dai didn't move, Gong Yimo laughed and hugged his back, looking at the top of the carriage, and continued speaking. Later on, you were also very powerful. I'm not a person who likes to scheme, but bringing you along probably affected you. I don't think you're the kind of person who would take the initiative to scheme against others. Your heart is still righteous, it's just that you think you're unscrupulous. But in my eyes, compared to her previous life, she was much kinder. She coughed a few times and continued speaking. In my eyes, you're already very good. Even if you don't admit it, but in your heart, there's a sense of justice and kindness. This point can be seen from the fact that you've never harmed any of the upright officials. Very good, this point is very similar to me. Gong Dai was so angry that he bit her neck. That moment of numbness stunned both of them. The air seemed to heat up, causing Gong Yimo's face to turn slightly red, which was very charming. Chapter 312. Gong Yimo looked at him nervously. Seeing that he didn't act rashly, she sighed softly and continued. Look at how well you did in Shi province. I only gave you a chance, but not only did you gain the approval of the people, you also accomplished a great deed. Even the emperor approved of you. Furthermore, you single-handedly disrupted Liu Ye's scheme, preventing the border from being plunged into chaos. Do you know, if it weren't for a freak combination of factors, once the war broke out, even if I didn't want to, I would have been forced to hand over the explosives. But if I didn't want to hand them over, I would have been condemned for eternity. So I'm very grateful to you. You're really amazing. Gong Yimo sometimes thought that if she hadn't been so high-profile and shone so brightly, the one who would have gained the approval of the people would definitely have been Gong Dai. Because she had lived 3 lives, but Gong Dai was still a teenager. When he started his business in Shi province, he was really 13. He was still a month away from being 14. Hearing Gong Yimo's praise, Gong Dai didn't feel proud. At this moment, he hugged Gong Yimo and his mind was blank. He just wanted to savor this moment of warmth. But when he heard that he had unintentionally helped Gong Yimo, he still felt proud and happy. The previous haze had long disappeared, leaving only joy. There was a very pleasant smell on him. It was very cold and refreshing. Gong Yimo suddenly felt moved. This was Gong Dai. After we returned to Dai Yu State, you protected me and faced the pressure of the entire country alone. You faced assassination attempts from all directions. When I left later, you bitterly said that you weren't capable enough. Actually, I don't think so. She spoke softly in his ear. At that time, no one could protect me, not to mention you, who was only 14 years old. You gave yourself too much pressure and always felt that it wasn't enough. But I felt that you were very outstanding and had long surpassed all the men in the world. Later on, you opened Chao Prison, trained the private army, controlled the imperial army, and took over the bank despite the objections of the masses. Everything you did, you were already much stronger than the others. I also know that you held back today because I didn't want the Dai Yu state to fall into chaos. I held back because I wanted to. It's not your fault that you respected my choice. You guessed right. I don't want you to rebel. You should be a carefree prince for the rest of your life, a prince who stands at the top of the world with real power. You and I both know in our hearts that once the banks in the 4 countries are established and we have cooperation, your power will be earth-shattering. You feel disappointed now only because you are anxious because of me. You feel that you can't control foreign countries. But once the banks are spread throughout the 4 countries, your power will undergo an earth-shattering change. At that time, you will be the strongest man. I may be a little stronger than you now, but you and I both know that you will soon surpass me. When Gong Dai heard this, he suddenly lifted his head to look at her. His eyes were clear and bright, with a hint of water in them. They were as pure as those of a deer when they were young. Gong Yimo couldn't help but smile as she reached out to touch his face. That's why. Don't be discouraged. You have a long road ahead of you. Don't be anxious because of me and mess up the steps. You are still a few months away from 17, right? Why give yourself so much pressure? I am already prepared to be surpassed by you. Seeing that Gong Dai still didn't say anything, Gong Yimo suddenly had an idea. She smiled and promised. I promise, before you become super powerful, I will never fall in love with another man. Her lips were suddenly sealed, and her eyes widened. Gong Dai, this rascal, actually dared to kiss her again. However, Gong Dai, who had been very obedient just a moment ago, now ignored her struggles and became aggressive again. He kissed her again and again, exploring everything about her. Their lips and teeth intertwined. Both of their hearts were beating very fast, as if they didn't belong to them. Although she knew that she shouldn't indulge, at this moment, Gong Yimo didn't know if it was because of fatigue or something else, but she felt that her brain was lacking oxygen. Her resistance was very weak, and in the end, it was as if she was just twisting her body under him, passively accepting his kisses. As for Gong Dai, he effortlessly broke through her teeth and kissed her deeply. She couldn't resist all of this. In the end, Gong Yimo felt as if she had turned into spring water, and Gong Dai kissed her until her lips were swollen. Only then did he let go of her, panting, and stop. The tips of their noses were touching, and their eyes were covered with a layer of water. "I don't need your promise anymore." Gong Yimo was kissed until she felt weak. At this moment, she stared at him with a pair of watery eyes. She didn't know what he was referring to. Her appearance almost made Gong Dai turn into a wolf. However, he gritted his teeth and endured it. He said in a low voice, "Royal sister, do whatever you want to do. I will catch up to you, and soon surpass you. I will have you openly, and I won't force you to make such a promise. I'm confused. I'm so strong. Who else would you choose other than me?" This was the first time he smiled, revealing his white teeth. His hand gently pinched the tender flesh on her face, and his eyebrows were raised. He smiled a little smugly. Gong Yimo pouted and slapped his hand away. "Stop fooling around." However, Gong Dai didn't agree. He kissed Gong Yimo's face again, and even rubbed against it like a big cat. "No, you're going to Lu Yi. How long has it been since we last saw each other?" Gong Yimo laughed. "It's only a few months. What's there to not be able to endure?" Gong Dai nibbled on her ear and said, "Not even for a day." This low and hoarse voice drilled into her ears, tickling her, causing her heart to start thumping again. Her face blushed even more. It really made Gong Dai want to eat her up right now, and then rebel. "Every day when I wake up, I think about when I'll eat you up, from the inside out." His hand dangerously hooked onto the edge of her collar. With a gentle tug, she would be perfectly displayed in front of him. Gong Yimo quickly grabbed her collar and glared at him. Her eyes were still misty, and her cheeks were flushed. That look was even more flirtatious, and it made Gong Dai's bones go soft. He couldn't help but lean forward again, and while tightly controlling her small hand that was about to resist, he hugged her and kissed her again and again, taking advantage of her. There was one thing he didn't point out, because he was afraid that Royal Sister would be shy and ignore him. That was. He could feel that this time, her hand that was resisting him was weak. She didn't resist him. Could it be said that she was also enjoying their skin contact? This knowledge made him happy again. If it wasn't for the fact that the timing wasn't right, he really wanted to hug her and not let go. Chapter 313. But this road was destined to have an end. After entering the palace, Gong Yimo was given special permission to rest, while Long Qingting Shui was grounded, and Gong Dai was called away by the emperor. Looking at Gong Dai's departing figure, her footsteps became lighter. She, who was originally upset and regretful because of her soft heart, suddenly didn't feel so regretful. She had been resisting, but she was about to leave. Before leaving, she followed her heart and was a little presumptuous for once. She wasn't sure where the road ahead of her was, so naturally, she wouldn't think too much about it. She would just look at the present. She didn't go to rest, but went to find Kim Yoon. At this time, Kim Yoon was sitting at the desk. His whole person was bewildered and his face was ugly. When he heard that Gong Yimo was here, for the first time, he didn't feel surprised, but guilty. Gong Yimo smiled at him. What's wrong? Today, I successfully turned things around and slapped Long Ching Ting Shue's face. You don't seem happy. After Gong Yimo came in, she didn't treat herself as an outsider and directly sat on his desk. Kim Yoon looked at her and was silent for a long time. Mo had always been like this. No matter how big the matter was, she would always be indifferent to it. She would never talk about how much trouble she had caused by doing what she had done today, nor would she complain about how much humiliation she had suffered. She always smiled like this, as if nothing could be difficult for her. But hurt was hurt, and Kim Yoon deeply blamed himself. He closed his eyes and said, Actually, Long Ching Ting Shue wanted to make a move on you, I knew. After saying this, Gong Yimo didn't react. He opened his eyes and saw Gong Yimo smiling, as if she didn't hear him. He really could never understand her thoughts. At that time, she came to me to cooperate, saying that she thought of a way to break you and Gong Dai apart. At that time, I rejected her. Kim Yoon looked out of the window and said faintly, but I didn't know her plan. I didn't know that she would make a move on you today, or use such a despicable method. The altar of worship was such a sacred place. She had indeed been punished by the heavens for what she had done. At this moment, he looked at Gong Yimo again and sighed deeply. His eyelids drooped, and even the enchanting mole under his eye dimmed. But I didn't tell you. If I had told you, you would have guarded against her and wouldn't have been so passive. He couldn't continue. In front of Gong Yimo, he felt that even the slightest bit of his ugly thoughts would be magnified infinitely. That day, he went to look for Gong Yimo to tell her. But for some reason, he forgot about it when he saw her. When he heard her rejecting him, he had his own thoughts. He smiled bitterly. I had hoped that she would succeed in getting Gong Dai, then I would have a chance. But I didn't expect that her method was to suppress you to achieve her own goal. Because of my selfishness, today, I've let you suffer. However, at that time, he couldn't do anything. The more he tried to explain, the worse it would get. He lowered his head deeply. After being together for a few years, he knew where Amor's weakness was. Today's incident must have hurt her. Will you hate me? Gong Yimo chuckled. Kim Yoon looked up in surprise. His forehead was knocked by Gong Yimo with the book on the table. You think too highly of me. Even if I know that Long Ching Ting Shue has bad intentions towards me, I can't guess what she wants to do. I'm not a deity. But Kim Yoon knew that Gong Yimo was just saying that to ease his mind. No buts. Gong Yimo raised her eyebrows and winked at him. If you really feel sorry for me, why don't you go and sign the bank's contract? Kim Yoon heard that and looked bitter. You really can do anything for Gong Dai. Gong Yimo couldn't deny it and said earnestly. Kim Yoon. We are friends, brother and sister, but we won't be lovers. I've always said it very clearly. I hope you can respect me. These words were like a bayonet, stabbing Kim Yoon's heart into pain. He looked at Gong Yimo, deeply looking at her. I will sign the contract, but Immerse. You taught me a lot before, but you never taught me to give up, so Gong Yimo looked at him, her expression inexplicably sympathetic as she interrupted him. There are many things that people are helpless in this life. Not everything will go as you wish. You said that I taught you a lot, so now, I'll teach you one last lesson. Don't waste time on impossible things, do what you should do. After saying that, Gong Yimo couldn't bear to look at Kim Yoon's expression. She just said faintly, go back. Yuheng needs you, and I have to go to Luyi. I only hope that the next time we meet, you and I can go back to how we were before. After saying that, she turned and left. The moment she left, she really felt that she couldn't bear it. It wasn't because of love, but because of his sadness and the ties of 2 lifetimes. He was very good to her, and she didn't want to make him sad. But she couldn't reciprocate his feelings. Instead of dragging it out and letting him feel that he still had a chance to continue being in pain, it was better to cut the Gordian knot. Now, she only hoped that time would smooth out everything, and when they met again, they could still be friends like before. A few days later, above the imperial city. Immerse, are you really leaving now? The sky was gloomy. Gong Che looked at Lu Yi and the others, who didn't look good. He frowned and asked, "Why don't you wait until after Imperial Father's birthday?" Gong Yimo smiled and said, "Brother Crown Prince, the Yu State is celebrating, and so is Lu Yi. This year, I'll spend it in Lu Yi. I'll also see how the people there celebrate." Seeing that Gong Yimo had made up her mind, Gong Che was reluctant, but he couldn't say anything. After all, Gong Dai was standing there obediently without saying anything. Although it was a little strange. Gong Yimo said goodbye to the Emperor, Empress, and the others. Then, she said goodbye to Kim Yoon. Looking at him today, his expression was much better than the other day. Although she didn't know what he was thinking, this was the first time he smiled from the bottom of his heart. Immerse, be careful on the road. I'll be delayed for a few days because of my contract, but I'll be leaving soon. I should be leaving after attending Yu State's birthday banquet. In the future. He thought for a long time. A trace of sadness flashed across his beautiful eyes. In the future, I hope to see you often. Gong Yimo smiled and patted him on the shoulder. You'll have the chance. I also wish you a safe journey back home. I'm leaving, don't miss me. Finally, she walked in front of Gong Dai. Gong Dai reached out to gather her thick cloak. His cold eyes were filled with gentleness. He said in a low voice, "When we reach Lu Yi, be careful. If there are any problems, let me know immediately. Don't always try to be brave. Understand?" Gong Emo looked at him, her eyes curved into a smile, and her tone was slightly emotional. "I know. Take care." No one said a word as they watched Gong Emo leave. Gong Cheng looked worried. Immerse brought too few people this time, but she insisted on only bringing 50 people. He didn't know what would happen when they reached Lu Yi. Chapter 314. Lu Yi had about 50 envoys, and there were even more people in the dowry delivery team. Including the guards, there were more than 1,000 people. Therefore, Gong Yimo was at a disadvantage in terms of numbers with only 50 people. However, these 50 people were carefully selected by Gong Dai. It was no exaggeration to say that every one of them was outstanding. Originally, the little princess of Yu State had started to cause trouble the moment they left. However, after Gong Yimo's subordinates displayed their strength, Lu Ye's people became obedient. As for Lu Ye's envoy, Buji, he had the biggest headache. Everything was going well, and they could have returned after delivering the dowry. However, their little princess had to persecute another princess on such an important day in Yu State. As a result, she had to be sent back to her country. The little princess might not be affected, but those of them who followed her would not have a good ending. However, since Yu State had already made this decision, there was nothing they could say. Therefore, they were all dejected along the way. The entire team was silent. "Princess, we're about to leave seclusion," someone said to Gong Yimo. At this moment, she was riding on a horse with her hair tied behind her head. She was looking into the distance with a calm expression. She looked like she had her own thoughts. It was very eye-catching. "We'll set up camp here tonight. Tomorrow, we'll cross the border and go to Yuheng. Seeing that it was getting late, Gong Yimo gave this order. However, Longqing's Shui did not listen. Why should we stop? Isn't it better to go to Yuhing tonight? I don't want to sleep in such a place. During this period, Longqing's Shui's temper had been getting worse. Her demands had never been met. She had never been so aggrieved in her life. The envoy saw that Gong Yimo's people were already setting up camp in front of them. She had her reasons for doing this. He was no match for her, so why couldn't he just swallow his pride? His silence agitated Longqing's Shui even more. Trash. I really don't know what Imperial Brother sees in you. When we return, I'll definitely ask Imperial Brother to punish you severely. Trash. Her expression was ferocious. Then, she angrily flung the curtain aside and ignored him. After being humiliated like this, even Boogie, who had a good temper, was a little angry at this moment. If she hadn't done such a thing as soon as she went to Daiyu State, would he have come in such a grand manner only to leave with his tail between his legs? However, this matter could not be reasoned with. Once he gave the order, the people behind him also began to set up camp. The entire process was very quiet. Later, only the sound of Ting Shui and Long City complaining about how bad the food was could be heard. However, Gong Yimo didn't care at all. She only looked in the direction of Yuhing, deep in thought. Now that she has the clearance letter from Kim Yoon in her hand, she is not afraid of being stopped by Bian Jiang. However, Yuhing still has Yunjin. She doesn't know if she has become better after what happened last time. Has she become more restrained, or has she become crazier? That was why she didn't act rashly and set up camp outside the pass. At night, the frontier fortress was very cold. However, Gong Yimo and the others were all highly skilled in martial arts. Naturally, they were not afraid. However, the people on Lu Ye's side were more miserable. Most of them slept restlessly. Suddenly, Gong Yimo opened her eyes. At the same time, there was the sound of swords being unsheathed outside the tent. The moment she walked out of the tent, she saw the person at first glance. She heard the commotion and the screams of women from Lu Ye's side. Gong Yimo calmly looked at Qiu Xingfeng, whose eyes were bloodshot with anger. She raised her hand and stopped everyone. Gong Yimo. Qiu Xingfeng's sword shook slightly. The two guards in front of him were forced back a few steps. He walked towards Gong Yimo step by step. His murderous aura made everyone on guard. However, because Gong Yimo didn't say anything, they didn't dare to act rashly. Gong Yimo saw his sword coming towards her. She stepped forward and directly clamped down on his raised hand. You're here to take revenge on me. Because I killed Long Hanyan. A cold light flashed through her eyes. That low voice strangely suppressed half of Qiu Xingfeng's anger. He didn't know why, but when he faced Gong Yimo, he always felt powerless. Why did you kill her? Qiu Xingfeng's clear eyes were filled with sadness and anger. The originally calm temperament was also destroyed by this anger. Only killing intent was left. Gong Yimo looked up and smiled at him. This person was her master who was willing to die for her in her previous life. However, in this life, he wanted to kill her for another person. How ironic. She flung away his hand that was holding the sword. She picked up a strand of hair and twirled it at her fingertips. She asked softly, "You're here to kill me. But did you ask clearly why I killed her?" She took a step closer to Qiu Xingfeng. Her voice was even softer. She was here to kill me, but I killed her instead. She can only blame herself for not being as skilled as others. Or is there such a rule in Mount Yunding that only members of the sect can kill, but others can't kill members of the sect? At the end, she smiled faintly with a trace of mockery. Her words made Qiu Xingfeng speechless. He wasn't very intelligent. When he heard that Long Han Yen died in Gong Yimo's hands, he was already unable to suppress his grief. He only wanted to kill Gong Yimo to vent his anger. However, now that he heard her say that it was his disciple who started it first, he felt that the sword in his hand seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds. He couldn't lift it anymore. But why didn't you just kill her? Why did you burn her body? Do you hate her so much that you couldn't wait to burn her to ashes? As if he had found a reason for his behavior, he became unyielding again. His eyes were red, like an injured little beast. Do you think that I burned her because I hated her to the core and wanted to burn her to ashes? Gong Yimo shook her head with a smile. Wouldn't it be better to burn her to ashes? Do you really think that there will be a soul that can enter the underworld and be reincarnated after being buried? Although she had experienced it twice, Gong Yimo didn't think that what happened to her was the manifestation of the gods. She didn't believe that there would be an underworld and an afterlife. Qiu Xingfeng was even more infuriated by her twisted logic. He clenched the sword in his hand so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Don't you feel afraid? You killed so many people. Don't you feel afraid every night in your dreams? Qiu Xingfeng naturally couldn't understand her because he had never killed anyone in his life. However, Gong Yimo's hands must have been stained with blood. Aren't you afraid of the nightmares? Gong Yimo's smile froze. She looked at Qiu Xingfeng and suddenly said with a serious face. If you want to fight, then let's fight. If you can kill me, that's your ability. As she said this, a hidden blade slid down from her hand, and the two of them leapt towards the open space outside the camp. During this process, they had already exchanged many moves. The two of them had serious expressions, and their moves were very fast. Qiu Xingfeng's moves were much fiercer than last time. However, Gong Yimo's moves were very smooth and casual, but she had the upper hand. You don't know her position in my heart. You don't know. Chapter 3:15. Gong Yimo was stunned, and Qiu Xingfeng's sword cut off a strand of her hair. He went forward again, and Gong Yimo quickly used her hidden blade to block his sword. At that moment, there seemed to be sparks. You don't know. When she was young, she was so little. She didn't like other people, so she pestered me and called me master. You don't know what she meant to me. His tone was deep. It wasn't hatred towards Gong Yimo, but self-reproach. As her master, he didn't protect her well. His words hit Gong Yimo's ears. At that moment, she felt her heart twitch, and it hurt fiercely. She never thought that killing Long Han Yen would make Qiu Xingfeng so sad. His grief seemed to be tangible. I fed her, I dressed her, I played with her, I accompanied her as she grew up. When she grew up, although she didn't like to play with me anymore, she was still my disciple. But you killed her. Qiu Xingfeng knew clearly that Long Han Yen had always treated him like a servant. When they grew up, she despised him more and more. She despised him for having the intelligence of a 10-year-old. But there were times when she was good to him. At least she was always with him. His senses were very sharp. He knew that, but he still treated her well. Maybe it was because of this that she didn't reject him. When they grew up, she was still willing to call him master. That was enough. Who asked her to be his little disciple? Gong Yimo heard his words, and her soul shook. In the end, his sword brushed past her shoulder, leaving a shallow wound. But she didn't feel it. She just looked at Qiu Xingfeng with an expression that he couldn't understand. She was really touched. Did he really side with whoever was with him? But when she was with him, she did better than Long Han Yen. Because she came from another world, she knew how to take care of her master, who was older than her, from a young age. Just for the friendship that he had brought her out of the palace. When he was mocked by the other brothers and refused to eat, she fed him. When he was exhausted from training, she was the one who helped him change his clothes. She played with him, taught him the basic ways of the world, and grew up with him. Even when someone insulted him verbally, she would still stand up and scold them back. He was clean and sincere, and she reciprocated with more sincerity. But she didn't expect that in this life, everything was reversed. He wanted to kill her for a girl that he had taken care of since she was a child. Even if she told herself in her heart that one life was another life, life couldn't be confused. But when he really pointed his sword at her, her heart would still hurt. It wasn't as simple as she thought. Letting go of the only good thing in her previous life. The process was as painful as a slow knife cutting meat. Chiu Xingfeng found it very strange that Gong Yimou's strength was not as good as his own, but he didn't think about the reason. He only wanted to kill her. To avenge his little disciple. Even if Yen was wrong, he would still kill Gong Yimou. If he killed her, he himself. Of himself. Ants of himself. He of him. Thinking, he of his of his of his of his of his. He seemed to have made up his mind to kill her. Gong Yimou's body was cut by him a few times. She was angry, in pain, in shock, and in hatred. At this time, Chiu Xingfeng slashed down with his sword and knocked Gong Yimou's sword away. When he slashed down again, Gong Yimou caught it with her bare hands. Her hand was still wrapped in gauze, but because of her violent emotions, her internal strength was attached to her hand. Like a fried dough twist, she twisted his treasured sword together. In the next moment, she closed in on him. Chiu Xingfeng didn't expect that the sword in his hand that had been tempered thousands of times would be so fragile in front of her. And Gong Yimou was only half an arm away from him. Her hand was claw-like in front of his chest. At that moment, he really felt that Gong Yimou wanted to dig out his heart. Blood dripped down. Gong Yimou held the sword in her hand. Even with the protection of her internal strength, she was still injured. But she wasn't afraid at all. She stared at him fiercely. Why? Madness flashed in her eyes. Every time she met Chiu Xingfeng, she had a feeling of impulsiveness and wanted to destroy the world. She only treated you as a servant, and you remembered her for your whole life. What about me? We were together for 13 years. How could you forget about me so cleanly? Did you forget who stood in front of you and said that he would protect you? Did you forget that you didn't like to eat cucumbers and were afraid that Master would blame you, so you let me eat them all? Did you forget who mended your clothes for you when they were torn? Even if you forgot everything. Her eyes were red, and her voice was filled with grief and anger. Even if you forgot everything, you should at least remember that you stood against everyone, including Yunding Mountain, for me. You should at least remember that you died for me. How could you forget everything, forget everything? As she spoke, her other hand was exerting force. Her 5 fingers dug deep into his chest, as if she really wanted to dig out his heart. That kind of hatred, that kind of sorrowful cry, was like a trapped beast that couldn't be released. She knew that she was being unreasonable. How could Chiu Xingfeng remember what happened in his last life? But he didn't remember. He came to kill her, but how could she, who remembered everything, do it? Kill him like she did to the others. Could he do it? She couldn't do it. Chiu Xingfeng was stunned by her words. He didn't understand what she was saying. What did she mean by she was with him for 13 years? Wasn't it Yen who was with him all the time? What did she mean by dying for her? Was this girl crazy? But his senses were so sharp. Gong Yimou's heavy grief wasn't faked. It made him hallucinate that there would be a person who would helplessly take away all the cucumbers in his bowl when the divine venerable turned around. She would coax the master to forgive him when he did something wrong. No, this wasn't his memory. This scene didn't happen. He came to kill her to avenge Yen. But the sword was destroyed, and so was his anger. He couldn't do it, and he didn't even know the reason. Gong Yimo gradually calmed down. Even though she knew clearly that a person who wanted to kill her couldn't be left alive. Maybe the lack of intelligence made people stubborn. Maybe Qiu Xingfeng would still kill her next time. However, when she pressed her hand on his chest, she could feel that his heart was in a mess. He was actually affected by her accusation just now. Her knuckles turned white, but she couldn't press down. In the end, she had to take a step back and give up. The girl who seemed to want to tear him apart just now seemed to be his hallucination. Now she lowered her head slightly and was quiet, even with a trace of coldness. I'll say it again. Long Han Yen wanted to kill me. Even if I have to do it all over again, I'll still kill her. Her voice was heavy with a trace of coldness. You can take revenge, but the next time you want to kill me, I'll definitely kill you. After that, she turned around and left. The cold wind blew her clothes up. There were still people waiting for her in the camp. Chapter 316. When Gong Yimo returned to the campsite, she was unable to catch her breath. At this time, the campsite was divided into two groups, Lu Ye's people and Daiyu State's people. The two groups were facing each other, and from the looks of it, they seemed to have fought just now. Seeing that she had returned safely, Long Qingting Shue's expression twisted for a moment. At this time, Gong Yimo was injured, but her injuries didn't look serious, and there wasn't much blood. What's going on? Are you welcoming me back? Gong Yimo asked airily. At this time, an imperial guard hurriedly handed her water and a handkerchief. Gong Yimo sat on the wooden shelf that was used to store luggage. She used the water from the water bottle to wash her wounds, and temporarily wrapped them with a handkerchief. When she was doing these actions, the people on both sides of the bonfire watched quietly. They watched as she cleaned her wounds without a frown. She was so calm that it was as if she had done this thousands of times. Even Long Qingting Shui, who had always disliked her, seemed to be stunned by her faint aura and couldn't speak for a long time. Someone come and explain the reason. After Gong Yimo tidied up a little, she calmly ordered Lu Ye's people. At a glance, it was obvious that Long Qingting Shui was the one who started this. She wanted to ask why. Seeing that Buji was still in a daze, Long Qingting Shui angrily glared at him. She stood up and said, "This consort doesn't want to go with you. You have so many enemies. This consort doesn't want to be implicated." Gong Yimo sat there lazily and raised her eyebrows at her. "Then what do you want?" Her tone was indifferent, as if she didn't care about her at all. This made Long Qingting Shui even angrier. She smiled deeply. "Nothing. I just want to separate from you so that I won't be implicated by you." Gong Yimo smiled. "Separate?" She looked at Long Qingting Shui's gloomy little face. "Then you'll return to the country first and kill me at Lu Ye's gate. Or you'll go to King Lu Yi to complain about me. You want me to become a prisoner the moment I go?" Gong Yimo's words made the little princess's face turn ugly. She did think so, but she didn't expect Gong Yimo to see through her so easily. At this time, someone handed over a cup of hot water for Gong Yimo to warm her body. She took a sip and asked softly. "Also, what right do you have to negotiate with me? Do you really know who you are? This princess is Lu Ye's princess." Gong Yimo laughed out loud. "You're wrong." She stopped laughing. "You fought with me, and you lost. In my eyes, you're a captive. Princess of Daiyu State, don't go too far." Buji had to stand up for his country's dignity. He immediately shielded Long Qingting Shui behind him. "Going too far. Gong Yimo asked, a little puzzled. Winner takes all. I heard that Lu Yi always speaks with his strength. If you're not convinced, just defeat me. But if you make me unhappy again, I don't mind letting you know what it means to go too far. Long Qingting Shui couldn't take this heavy humiliation. Her eyes reddened, and she ran back to her carriage. Even if Buji was angry, there was nothing he could do. People had to bow their heads under someone else's roof. He didn't understand what Gong Yimo was thinking. Was it good for her to offend the little princess like this? She still had to go to Lu Yi. If she really offended the little princess, what good would it do for her to stay in Lu Yi? She probably didn't know how much the little princess was doted on by Lu Yi. With a sigh, Boogie left as well. They were unlucky. Gong Yimo didn't speak so harshly, but what happened just now still affected her and put her in a bad mood. At this time, looking at the Imperial Guards, she suddenly remembered that they were all Gong Dai's spies. This trip to Lu Yi will take at least a few months, at most half a year. You are all people that Gong Dai picked for me. Do you know who your master is? The Imperial Guards looked at each other, not knowing what Gong Yimo meant. Wasn't the relationship between the princess and His Highness always very good? Gong Yimo sighed, forget it, it's nothing. But tonight's matter, you can't tell Gong Dai. Violators, she lowered her eyes and used her strength, turning the entire cup into powder. There's such a cup. Everyone was shocked by Gong Yimo's move. In their hearts, they had a clearer idea of Gong Yimo's strength. We obey. Gong Yimo nodded in satisfaction and went back to rest. She didn't know what would happen when she went to Yuheng the next day. The shortest distance from Daiyu State to Lu Yi was to cross Yuheng. In this way, they would definitely pass by the capital city of Yuheng. Along the way, because of Kim Yoon's letter, they had a smooth journey. When they reached the capital city, Gong Yimo felt that something was wrong. Almost immediately, she made a decision. That was to let the Imperial Guards take Lu Yi and his men first. She would be separated from the rest for a period of time until they successfully passed through the capital city of Yuheng. The Imperial Guards General, Sikong, received the order and left without asking. Gong Yimo followed behind from a distance. She could feel that someone was secretly spying on her. She pursed her lips and smiled. Seeing that the large group had successfully passed through the capital city and exited the city gates, Gong Yimo heaved a sigh of relief. She was about to sneak out when she was stopped by someone. The other party looked familiar. One look and she knew that they were Yun Guifei's people. No wonder she felt that someone was watching her from the beginning. It wasn't an illusion. Your Highness, please come with us. Gong Yimo raised her brows slightly. Tell her that I'm very busy and not free. However, the other party didn't give up. He frowned and said, this matter is very important. It concerns the second prince. Please help us, Your Highness. Gong Yimo raised her brows slightly. You want to use Kim Yoon to trick me? Dream on. It's not like that. A trace of reluctance appeared on that person's face. Seeing that Gong Yimo was stubborn, he could only hurriedly say, it concerns the second prince's background. Someone claims to be the second prince's father. By now, the news might have reached the second prince's hands, but it's beyond his reach. Gong Yimo's expression changed a few times. Wasn't Kim Yoon's father Jin Xing? What the hell was this extra person? She wondered if this was Yoon Jin's scheme. After thinking for a moment, Kim Yoon's safety still prevailed. She stroked her chin. All right, I'll go with you. That person's expression relaxed. Thank you, Your Highness. Just like that, Gong Yimo was dressed up and changed her appearance to enter the Yuheng Palace. Coming in again, it really felt like a lifetime had passed. Before she even reached Yun Guifei's bedroom, she saw layers of security. Yun Guifei, who had always been able to get whatever she wanted, was actually being watched. It seemed that many things had happened after Kim Yoon left this time. That person brought Gong Yimo in through the back door. From afar, they could hear Jin Xing's exhausted and angry voice. How dare you betray me? I'll kill you. Chapter 317. Gong Yimo glanced at the person who brought her in. She found a place to hide first and continued eavesdropping. Jin Xing looked like he was about to explode. He held the whip in his hand and pointed it at the weeping Yunjin. Although his face was pale and he looked very weak, the strength he used to whip her was not weak at all. He did not look like a patient who had been lying in bed for a long time. Yunjin was really wronged. Your Majesty. This concubine really doesn't know that person. Smack. Jin Xing whipped her again. At this moment, a woman dressed in court attire beside him held his hand and said, Your Majesty, you have just recovered from a serious illness. It's better not to get angry. Jin Xing glanced at her when he heard this. The Empress is still the most reasonable one. When his gaze landed on Yunjin, it was filled with deep hatred. After all, he was not a fool. Kim Yoon now had too much influence in Yuheng. If he wanted to make a comeback, he had to take advantage of Kim Yoon's absence and pin the crime of having an illegitimate father on him. Only then would he have a chance to retaliate. So he had been pretending to be sick all this time. Finally, this day had come. As he thought about it, he coldly pointed at the woman he once loved on the ground and said, Men. This bitch is causing trouble in the palace. Bestow her with poisoned wine. Without waiting for Yunjin to say anything, he laughed and said, When that bastard comes back, we will teach him a lesson. On the other side, the people from Dayu State had been waiting outside the city for a long time. When they saw that Gong Yimo did not come out, they left 10 people to guard here. The rest continued on their way according to Gong Yimo's instructions and waited for her to finish her business before coming back to look for them. When the little princess saw this scene, she had a plan. She took out a bag of medicine and steeled her heart. She poured it into the teapot in the carriage and drank it herself. It was just a normal poison that would only make one's limbs weak. There shouldn't be any problems. On Gong Yimo's side, seeing that the emperor was going to sentence Yunjin to death, she couldn't take it anymore. She said to the person who brought her in, How many people did Kim Yoon leave behind? That person nodded. Half of the imperial guards around here are your highness men. But what? Gong Yimo frowned and asked. It's just that many people in the palace have switched sides. Half of the imperial guards around the imperial consort are on the emperor's side, but the rest are all on the emperor's side. Once a fight breaks out, they can only wait to be captured. It seemed that he had also thought about rebelling. Well, Yunjin was about to be killed. If he didn't rebel, was he going to wait for death? This matter cannot be delayed. Once the emperor kills the imperial concubine and spreads the news that the imperial concubine committed suicide for fear of punishment, Kim Yoon is really a vile spawn, then he will be in a very passive position when he returns. Gong Yimo's brain spun quickly and he finally made a prompt decision. Go out and save them now. I'll be back in a jiffy. That person definitely wouldn't believe it. He thought that Gong Yimo would take the opportunity to escape. Moreover, without Gong Yimo around, he didn't have the guts to start a rebellion. With only half of the imperial concubine's men here. Your Highness trusts me so much, but you don't. Let go. Her gaze turned cold and she subconsciously let go of the imperial concubine's hand. Seeing Gong Yimo quickly disappear behind the wall, he was a little hesitant. He really couldn't get used to Gong Yimo's fast pace. Who didn't think over and over again before finally making a difficult decision when they wanted to rebel? Unlike her, who made a decision after meeting face to face. However, when he heard Imperial concubine Yun's miserable scream from inside, his face darkened. Should he do it or not? Do it. The poisoned wine was already prepared. Jin Xing pinched Yun Jin's chin and wanted her to drink it. However, he didn't expect that Yun Jin actually spilled the poisoned wine when she struggled. This made Jin Xing angry out of humiliation. Slut! You refuse a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. Now, whenever he looked at Yun Jin, he would get angry. He actually didn't want her to die so easily. He rolled his eyes and thought of a vicious idea. Guards! Here! More than 10 Imperial guards walked out from behind him. This slut is naturally promiscuous. Since she doesn't want to die properly, I'll give her to you. You can play with her however you want in front of me. His words made Yun Jin widen her eyes in disbelief. The Imperial guards hesitated and looked at each other. However, Jin Xing shouted loudly. Why aren't you doing it? I want to watch you play with her. The Imperial guards didn't dare to disobey and surrounded Yun Jin. Soon, her clothes were torn apart, revealing her snow-white skin. Your Majesty! Your Majesty, I beg you! Don't be like this! I beg you! At this moment, Yun Jin was crying without any sense of beauty. There was only fear. She crawled over and hugged Jin Xing's leg, ignoring the fact that her dress was being torn apart behind her. Jin Xing looked at her coldly. This woman had almost ruined him. Fortunately, he had seized the opportunity to counterattack. Otherwise, he would have been killed by Kim Yoon sooner or later. With that thought, he kicked Yun Jin away. Someone pulled Yun Jin's leg and dragged her back. More than 10 figures immediately surrounded her. At that moment, she felt despair. No! But at this moment, someone suddenly rushed in. Bad news! Your Majesty, bad news! Jin Xing and the Empress were shocked at the same time. Did Kim Yoon come back early? Jin Xing asked fearfully. This was what they were most afraid of. The servant said, No. No, the palace is on fire. Many places are burning. It can't be put out. Gong Yimou looked at the loft in front of her and poured oil mercilessly. This oil was the oil that Kim Yoon had brought back a year ago. This was because they had opened many mines in Yuheng back then. Although the progress was slow, they still had some gains. And this oil was the first batch of samples that were extracted. Each sample tank represented a different refining process. There were more than 10 tanks. Winter was dry. She set the fire down and it quickly burned. The raging flames burned in her eyes. At this moment, she stood on the roof and looked down at the palace servants who were scattered in fear. She revealed a cold smile. After setting fire to one place, she didn't delay and immediately ran to the next place. At her speed, half of the entire Yuheng palace would be burned down by her. At first, Jin Xing didn't think much of it. But when he arrived at the courtyard and saw the thick smoke rising from the palace, he quickly shouted in fright. What are you waiting for? Everyone, go put out the fire. As for himself, he angrily ran back and chased the others away. He kicked the half-naked Yun Jin a few times with great force and finally grabbed her long hair and lifted her up. His expression was ferocious. Bitch! What are you doing? Are you trying to destroy the foundation left by Yuheng's ancestors? At this moment, Yun Jin couldn't hear what he was saying. But at the same time, the sound of fighting came from the courtyard. Jin Xing suddenly felt that something was wrong. He stood up and looked outside. He saw the Imperial guards who were guarding the palace suddenly rushing in. The gleaming machete was heading straight for him. Someone was rebelling. Chapter 318. Yuhing was besieged on all sides, and the outside of the city was also in a mess. The little princess was powerless as she was dragged away. She did not have the ability to resist at all. She never expected that she was only pretending to be sick and sneaking away when no one was paying attention. She wanted to return to Lu Yi alone. However, when she finally succeeded, a few men in black covered her mouth and took her away. She did not have time to take the antidote, so when she was taken away, she did not even have the strength to struggle or scream. The little princess had disappeared. This was something that no one had expected. The people of Dai Yu State thought that Lu Ye's people would take care of her, so as long as they did not cause trouble, they would turn a blind eye. And Lu Ye's people did not expect that their little princess, who had been doted on since she was young, would run away. She did not know martial arts, and she did not even have money on her. How could she survive without them? They searched outside the city for a long time, but they could not find the little princess. Both sides were very anxious. One side felt that they could not answer to Gong Yimo, and the other side felt that they could not answer to King Lu Yi. But they also felt that it was strange. With the little princess's ability, she could not have left so quietly, unless someone helped her. No, perhaps she had been kidnapped. They were in a mess, but Yuheng's palace was even more chaotic. The entire palace's inner courtyard was filled with smoke. Many commoners outside the palace looked up and saw the rising black smoke. They felt that something was wrong. Clamorous shouts and hurried footsteps could be heard everywhere. Suddenly, there was fire everywhere. They did not know which place to save. In such chaos, many of the more fragile people thought that the neighboring countries were coming to kill them. Everyone was in a state of panic. It was too noisy, so no one paid attention to what was happening in the imperial consort's chambers because there was no fire there. Black ashes fell from the sky as if it was snowing. The courtyard was littered with corpses. Many palace servants were curled up in a corner, shivering. The Empress and the Emperor were hiding in a corner of the room, and there were more than 10 people who were resisting stubbornly. Yunjin had been dragged to the side by a person who was wearing a coat. That person was the one who stopped Gong Yimo. He was also Yunjin's guest, Wang Jing. He looked ordinary and was not favored among the people around her, but he was the one who admired Yunjin the most. Jin Sheng was scared out of his wits. Who was it that wanted to rebel? Why didn't he have any warning beforehand? How could he have known? How could there have been any omen? It was all Gong Yimo's subconscious behavior. Seeing that none of the imperial guards outside came in to save the emperor, Jin Sheng felt that the situation was hopeless. Why was it that after scheming for so long and instigating so many people to defect, in the end, he was still defeated so easily? Who exactly did he lose to? The emperor's men fell one by one. At this moment, people outside finally heard the commotion and rushed over. More and more people came, desperately trying to squeeze into the courtyard. Yunjin's men quickly resisted, and the people who charged in were even more desperate. They knew very well that as long as they could capture the emperor before the emperor's men rushed in, it would be considered a victory. Why are they so slow? The imperial guards are about to charge in. This voice. Yunjin suddenly snapped out of her daze and looked out the door, only to hear a loud sound. A person flew into the room and hit the corner of the table, causing the 2 doors to collapse, revealing the scene outside. Jin Sheng's men had already charged in. At that moment, Jin Sheng's eyes shone with infinite vitality. Now was the time to compete in speed. It depended on whether the reinforcements would first destroy the imperial guards in the courtyard and then kill Yunjin, or whether Yunjin's men would capture the emperor first and use him as a hostage to command the world. At this critical moment, the few people who were stubbornly resisting saw that their men had already charged in and instantly became extremely strong. They actually managed to resist. Yunjin's men were not many to begin with, and now that the sounds of fighting and killing were getting closer and closer, their morale dropped and they retreated in defeat. A race of life and death was just a moment. But they would not forget that there was still Gong Yimo, this great killer weapon. They saw her use her sword to shake off all the people around her, and then like a hot knife through butter, she grabbed at the emperor. Finally, in the instant when Yunjin's men were almost all gone, her hand grabbed the emperor's neck, and she took a deep breath, lifted him up, and strode outside. At this moment, everyone put down their weapons. Her entrance was simply too domineering. Just now when she was killing in all directions, because there were too many people in the courtyard, they did not have the time to take care of her. But when she cleaned up the trouble and charged into the room like a sword to capture the emperor alive, they then realized how abnormal this person's martial skills were. She said that she would turn the tide. It was clearly a situation of certain death, but because of her appearance, there was a completely different change. This was what it meant to turn the tide. So when she carried Jin Xing out of the room, everyone was truly speechless. They could not help but feel fear in their hearts. The emperor had painstakingly calculated the current situation, but not only had she messed it up, she had also caught it. To catch bandits, first catch the ringleader. Even if they were unwilling, they could only stop and not dare to move again. At this moment, the empress suddenly wanted to shout, "She is the princess of Daiyu State." If others knew that the princess of Daiyu State was participating in Yuheng's national affairs, and it was a major matter related to the throne. Let's see if Kim Yun can successfully ascend the throne. Even if she died, she would not let Kim Yun have an easy time. But unexpectedly, she had only said one word before her throat was sealed by a hairpin. In the end, when she died, her eyes were wide open. She did not know what had happened. The palace servants beside her were already scared enough. At this moment, their faces were inexplicably splattered with blood. One could imagine how terrified they were. They immediately covered their faces and screamed. "Ah! The Empress is dead!" A stone stirred up 1,000 ripples. Everyone inside and outside the room was stunned. At this moment, they did not dare to look at the woman standing in front of the door. Just now, the Empress had only screamed, and she pulled out the hairpin and threw it without looking back. It directly pierced the Empress's neck. She died with her eyes open. What more them? They had never seen anyone so bold. The Empress of a country was not a chicken. She killed without batting an eyelid. It was clear that she was extremely bold, determined, and cruel. But thinking about it, even the emperor of one of the 4 great countries was strangled by her. What more a mere empress? So when she stood in front of the door and swept her gaze across, everyone quieted down and did not dare to move. There were murmurs outside, and people kept trying to rush in. And now, the people inside just wanted to run out like crazy. Who was this woman? How could she be so terrifying? Chapter 319. Jin Xing couldn't catch his breath. His legs kicked wildly, and only the tips of his feet touched the ground. Gong Yimo was also afraid of strangling him to death, so she loosened her grip. He fell to the ground and coughed violently. His eyes were wide open, but he didn't dare to move a single step. The emperor was right in front of him, but even so, there were so many imperial guards a few steps away, but none of them dared to come forward and watch him suffer coldly. At this moment, Yunjin finally regained her senses. There was no other way. The impact of the scene just now was too great. She never thought that Gong Yimo would save her, and in such a way. The air was filled with the smell of burnt wood. The sky was gloomy, and black ashes fell like black snow. It looked like hell on earth. There was still a commotion outside, but Gong Yimo didn't care. She only glanced at the crowd disdainfully and said to Yunjin, where are you going to hide? How long are you going to hide? Are you waiting for me to take care of your family matters? Yunjin woke up from her dream and walked out with Wang Jing's help. At this moment, she was a little timid, afraid to get close to Gong Yimo. This feeling was just like when she first met her. She was intimidated by her aura, and every time she got close to her, she didn't even dare to breathe loudly. She still had some brains. At this moment, she didn't dare to call out Gong Yimo's name, so she asked in a low voice. What should we do now? What should we do? Gong Yimo raised her eyebrows and looked at her. Now that it was a life and death situation, what else could they do? She smiled and whispered in Yunjin's ear, there's still a bottle of poisonous wine in the house, right? This sentence actually scared Yunjin so much that her face turned pale. Her body trembled like a sieve. She couldn't believe that Gong Yimo actually wanted her to kill the emperor. Those ministers wouldn't let her off. At this moment, Gong Yimo waved her hand. Yunjin and the rest of the people strangely understood her meaning and sealed the door of the courtyard. At this moment, the people outside the courtyard seemed to have a bad premonition. They didn't want to rush in, so the heavy door was locked, separating the two worlds. This action caused the people in the courtyard to be terrified. What was he trying to do? Kill him to silence him. At this moment, they all began to regret rushing in so quickly. The action of closing the door also frightened Yunjin. At this moment, in her eyes, Gong Yimo was like a devil. She even wanted to kill the emperor. It was too terrifying. However, Gong Yimo did not care whether she could accept it or not. She glanced at Wang Jing. You, go and bring me the wine that His Majesty bestowed upon the imperial concubine. As soon as she said that, Jin Xing couldn't care less about his discomfort. He looked around in a panic and sat on the ground, screaming at the top of his lungs. You! Quickly save me! Cough cough, I confer upon you the title of National Protector Great Generals. Save me! At this time, Wang Jing came out with the wine. Hearing this, he glanced at Yunjin, sighed, and said to the people present. Wang Jing, you all know me. We used to be brothers who trained together. Now, I'm no different from everyone else. It's just that I'm loyal to His Highness. He glanced at Jin Xing on the ground and said, the reason why I rebelled and sought refuge with His Highness was not because His Highness promised me a high position and a generous salary, but because my younger sister was valued by this dog of an emperor. He snatched her into the palace and within a year, she passed away. As he said this, a trace of sorrow appeared on his face. Jin Xing had indeed done many bad things. When he mentioned it, everyone present could think of 7 or 8 things. Wang Jing took a deep breath and said loudly to the crowd, dog of an emperor, Jin Xing. He's muddle-headed and tyrannical because he didn't rule strictly. When an of Silla was in power, how many unjust and tragic cases did he cause? Every time there was a natural disaster and the people were suffering unspeakably, what did he do? Either he let it happen and let it happen, leaving corpses everywhere. Even if there was relief food, it would become old rice in the hands of the people. This is the country under this dog of an emperor. Wang Jing spoke louder and louder. Moreover, no one refuted him. And since 3 years ago, when His Highness gradually took over the throne, what about His Highness? His Highness did everything himself, from building roads and digging waterways. In just 3 years, even if our Yuheng is not the wealthiest, we can still be ranked second, right? Moreover, His Highness is benevolent and respectful to the emperor. He isn't passionate about the throne, but what about this dog of an emperor? He's afraid that his position will be taken away. Yesterday, he even found someone to spread a rumor that he's the second prince's biological father. What a joke. For his own selfish interests and his own position, he would even harm his own son and kill his wife. Do you really want him to be the emperor of our Yuheng? Everyone was silent. No one spoke, but Gong Yimo interrupted at the right time. She twirled a strand of her hair around her finger and smiled faintly. This person. His life and death are in the hands of a single thought. Even the emperor is like this, what about you? This implied threat directly made everyone present kneel down. An inexplicable chill deeply pierced their brains, causing their backs to go numb. Gong Yimo glanced at them. Her gaze was like a sharp blade, making them feel as if they had been scraped by it. She took a step forward, and there seemed to be a substantial pressure on her body. When she stepped forward, everyone wanted to retreat. Those who are here today, if you follow my orders, you can walk out of the door behind you alive. If you don't, you can stay here forever. Make your choice. As soon as she finished speaking, everyone lowered their heads and kowtowed, trembling as they spoke. We will definitely keep our mouths shut. Please spare us from death. Seeing that everyone was kowtowing at Gong Yimo's feet, Jin Sheng was finally afraid. At the most critical moment, he suddenly thought of slandering Gong Yimo. When Gong Yimo changed her name to Shiryu, no one else had seen her, but the nobles in the palace had seen her twice. He wanted to tell the world that all of this was a conspiracy of the Dayu state. That unfilial son of his had long been brainwashed by that demoness of the Dayu state and wanted to commit treason. The fact that the princess of the Dayu state had repeatedly interfered in all of this was evidence. He wanted to tell the world. But before he could speak, Gong Yimo seemed to have sensed his thoughts. She directly reached out and lifted him up again. Then she pinched his chin with one hand, making him unable to speak. She glanced at Yunjin from the corner of her eyes. What are you waiting for? Why aren't you serving the emperor? Yunjin was so frightened that she didn't dare to move. That was the emperor, the son of the true dragon. Even if she dared to drug him, she would never dare to poison him to death. Jin Xing glared at Gong Yimo with hatred. Before she came, his life was so carefree. She had ruined his plans time and time again. Last time, she had left Yuheng alive. So this time, she came back to take revenge. And he was going to die in the hands of a woman. Seeing that Yunjin wasn't moving, Gong Yimo was a little impatient. I still have something to do. I'll count to 3. If you don't do it, I'll leave immediately. Her words inexplicably gave Jin Xing a chance to live. Chapter 320. He glared fiercely at Yunjin. He glared at this woman. She was most afraid of him showing such an expression. He wanted to stare fiercely at her. It was all her fault. It was all because he had favored her again that he was unlucky. She was also not a good person. As for Kim Yoon, although Kim Yoon was not bad, who knew if he was his son? Ha ha ha. The 3 of them were not good people. 1. Jin Xing struggled to break free from Gong Yimo and threaten Yunjin. 2. Gong Yimo did not look like she was faking it. Moreover, Jin Xing was confident that once Gong Yimo left, he would definitely gain the upper hand again. When that time came, he would throw Yunjin into the lowest grade military camp to be a military prostitute. He would let her suffer humiliation and die. 3. Wang Jing panicked, Your Highness. I'll do it. Yunjin finally made up her mind. She was still afraid of death. Holding the wine flask, she walked step by step towards Gong Yimo. With every step she took, her heart trembled. She could not hold the wine flask steadily in her hand. Why didn't Gong Yimo directly kill the emperor? Why did she have to do it? Thinking of this, she could not help but glare at Gong Yimo with some resentment. Gong Yimo smiled. She did it on purpose. These people today were all witnesses. They had all witnessed that Kim Yoon had died in Yoonjin's hands. So in the future, even if Yoonjin wanted to find trouble with her, she would have to solve her own problems first. After all, she did not intend to kill these people. Moreover, there was no such thing as an impenetrable wall. All of this might have some effect on Kim Yoon, but the effect would not be great. However, Yoonjin was different. As a wife, poisoning her husband was a crime punishable by death. However, with Kim Yoon around, even if she did not die, she could only be put under house arrest in the palace. She would have to abstain from meat and pray to Buddha for the rest of her life. She had betrayed him, and he was giving her a little reward. Gong Yimo smiled, revealing her pearly white teeth. She was not a person who held grudges, but when she could take revenge, she would do it. How satisfying! With that thought in mind, Gong Yimo gave an order. Raise your heads. When she said that, everyone raised their heads and looked at this scene with their eyes wide open. The emperor was forced to drink poisoned wine by his own concubine. Just this alone was enough for Jin Xing to go down in infamy for 10,000 years. Under everyone's gaze, Yoonjin couldn't bear to do it. Wang Jing couldn't bear it. He glanced at Gong Yimo and said in a low voice, "Nyang Nyang, let this subject come down. I don't want to dirty your hands." That was exactly what Yoonjin wanted. She was about to hand the flagon to him, but Gong Yimo saw it and said coldly, "Is there a difference? He's one of your people. If you think that you can use him as a shield when the truth is revealed, you'll be spared. Aren't you too naive?" Unless Gong Yimo did it herself, she could push the blame to the Dayu state and say that it was Dayu state's conspiracy, or push the blame to the assassins. But why would Gong Yimo agree? She didn't have any evidence against her. Could it be that there was someone here who could prove her identity? Yoonjin also hoped that Gong Yimo would do it herself, but her expectant gaze was like throwing it to a blind person. In her anger, she mustered up her courage, named the mouth of the flagon at Jin Xing's mouth, and poured it in. And she was really ruthless. Her beautiful eyes were filled with anger as she poured the entire flagon down. When Gong Yimo released her hand, Jin Xing vomited blood and died in a few seconds. It was clear how strong the poison was. Even as he died, he stared at Yoonjin with his eyes wide open. He was obviously unwilling. With a "paw" sound, the strange silence was broken. The flagon fell to the ground and shattered into pieces. Yoonjin leaned back and almost fainted. Fortunately, Wang Jing held her. At this time, Wang Jing looked at Gong Yimo with deep respect. Because of her, the Yuheng Emperor and Empress died in a day. And because of her, Yoonjin, who was about to be humiliated to death, survived. Kim Yoon's position was stabilized, and a disaster was resolved. Such a woman was only 17 years old. 17. His guts and intelligence were enough to turn an entire dynasty upside down in an instant, causing a storm with a flip of his hand. She was really too scary. The noise outside the walls gradually quieted down. The fire must have been extinguished, but the anxiety in the air didn't dissipate because the demon was still here. Gong Yimo shook her hand. Her hand was a little sore from exerting too much force just now. "What happened today? Will you tell anyone?" Her voice was low. Everyone quickly shook their heads subconsciously. Many of them even kowtowed and swore that they wouldn't tell anyone. At this time, Yoonjin was already muddle-headed and Wang Jing wasn't a person who could see things clearly. So at this moment, the Yuheng Imperial Palace actually allowed her to do whatever she wanted. "You go to the Jinshur department and get someone to record all the losses." The person who Gong Yimo pointed at was stunned and then ecstatic. He quickly went. The door opened a small crack. That was the door of hope. Seeing that someone left alive, many of them looked at Gong Yimo with anticipation, hoping that she would point at them. You, go to Minglian Lane and get someone to record all the deaths. Those who escaped during the chaos, punish them severely. Yes. Another person quickly responded and quickly got up and ran out. After staying in Yuheng for almost 3 years, Gong Yimo was quite familiar with this place. She quickly gave out orders one by one. That posture was as if he was pointing at the world and was in high spirits. She was even more confident than the Empress, and even more serious and calm than the Emperor. Yet, with just a few words from her, everyone went about their duties. If this continued, order would be restored to the Yuheng Imperial Palace after this chaos. At this moment, Wang Jing didn't know what to say. He sincerely felt that calling Gong Yimo was a wise choice. Fast. Accurate. Ruthless. Other than her, if he called anyone else, Yun Jin would have died long ago or been persecuted by a group of people. Therefore, he was very glad that he had targeted her from the beginning. Finally, Gong Yimo stretched. She saw the frightened Yun Jin crying in Wang Jing's arms, grabbing his clothes and crying like a little girl. She couldn't help but sigh and strode away. If she wanted to leave, no one dared to stop her. Even if she caused the imperial palace to be filled with smoke, even if she expanded her power and stirred up the entire palace. She caused a dynasty to change in an instant, but when she left, she was still calm as if she didn't do anything. She was unbelievably confident. She was really in a hurry. Although she pretended to be calm on the surface, she was still feeling weak in her heart. She made a fool of Yun Jin and vented her anger. She also burned half of Yuheng Imperial Palace. How much money was that? Kim Yun would definitely be furious when he came back. She'd better leave quickly. However, she didn't expect that when she rushed out of the city, there was a bigger trouble waiting for her. Chapter 321. By the time she rushed to the city gates, it was already 15 minutes later. The city was in chaos. Kim Yun's subordinates saw the smoke rising from the imperial palace, and the people's hearts were unsettled. They quickly placed the entire city under martial law, so it took her a lot of effort to get out. Now, she could only wait to meet up with the others before continuing forward. But from afar, she saw a group of people waiting for her. She suddenly had a bad premonition. Eldest princess. You're finally back. A lively young man from the Imperial Guards said bitterly. Where did you go? Gong Yimo scratched her head in embarrassment. She couldn't possibly say that she went to change the dynasty, right? What happened? She quickly got off her horse and asked. She glanced at Lu Ye's group and had an idea. The little princess is missing. Her premonition came true. Gong Yimo widened her eyes slightly. She doesn't know martial arts. How did she disappear? At this moment, the leader of the Imperial Guards, Sikong, stepped forward and said, she seemed to have suddenly fallen ill. When we were about to stop and look for a doctor, Lu Yi suddenly ran over and said that the little princess was missing. We checked the traces and found that the little princess ran away from the back of the group. As for why we couldn't find her, perhaps someone helped her, or perhaps she was kidnapped. Gong Yimo frowned. This matter could be big or small. If the little princess died, then the enmity between Lu Yi and the Daiyu state would be set. And as the person involved in this matter, Lu Yi would definitely seek an explanation from her. However, the Crown Prince and Gong Dai were both on her side, so they would definitely reject Lu Ye's request. In this way, if things got serious, wouldn't they start a war? It was all her fault. She never thought that someone would intervene at this time. It was impossible for Yuheng to do it. They had not settled their own family matters yet, so it was impossible for them to come looking for trouble with her. It was also impossible for Yuheng to do it. Jin Sheng had been busy killing Yun Jin and framing Kim Yoon for the past 2 days. It was impossible for him to pay attention to her. Moreover, she had just killed 2 of Yuheng's most senior members. Then it could only be Dai Yu State and Lu Yi. If it was the Dai Yu State, it would definitely be Long Xiangxiang's doing. As long as the little princess was killed, it would instantly create a storm and disrupt the situation of the Dai Yu State's crown prince and King Qi's hegemony. If it was Lu Yi, it could only mean that someone didn't like the little princess and wanted to kill her with a borrowed knife. Gong Yimo's brain was spinning rapidly. No matter who it was, the only solution was to find Long Cheng's Ting Shui before they killed anyone. What a troublesome girl. Couldn't she be more peaceful? Why are you running? If she didn't run, the other party wouldn't dare to make a move against her with over 1,000 people on her side. They were really courting death. Gong Yimo's mind immediately displayed the topographic map of this area. She also called Lu Ye's men over. The situation was urgent and they couldn't care less. Everyone gathered together and Gong Yimo gave the orders. The few of you, bring 100 people over here. There's a small hill over there. There are many naturally formed karst caves in the hills that can hide people. Go take a look. Also, the other party probably has a lot of people. Be careful. The few Imperial guards who were leading the group obeyed and brought 100 of Lu Ye's men in the direction that Gong Yimo pointed out. You, bring 200 people over there. There's a forest over there and it's easy to hide. Go quickly. Yes. Gong Yimo then said to Buji, time is of the essence. After leaving 100 people behind, please bring the rest of the people over there. That direction is the commoners' area and the houses are densely packed. The other party might be hiding there. Be quick. Buji hurried over. He was surprised that Gong Yimo knew so clearly. There were 100 people left. Gong Yimo quickly thought of the nearby places where they could hide. There seemed to be none, as if her eyes suddenly lit up. There was a mine nearby, but it belonged to Yuheng's country. She didn't think about it previously. But now that she thought about it, those people might really be daring enough to do such a thing. However, it was smart to do so. Because once the matter was exposed, not only would she be unable to escape responsibility, the person behind the scenes would also be able to frame Yuheng. It was really killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Gong Yimo rode over quickly, leaving 20 people behind to look after the luggage. The rest followed closely behind without any objections. When they arrived, they dismounted and followed Gong Yimo into a mountainous area on foot. The mountainous area was deserted and the Thunder River meandered through. After Gong Yimo dismounted, she looked at the ground and found that there were many traces of people entering and exiting here. Could it really be here? She looked at the 70 to 80 people she brought with her and was a little worried. She wasn't afraid of anything else. She was only afraid that when the fight started, the little princess would be killed and she wouldn't be able to stop it in time. After all, the mine was not like other places. It was too complicated. If only they could force them to come up. Long Ting Shui looked around with her eyes wide open. At this moment, her hands and feet were tied and her mouth was stuffed. She really couldn't cry for help. In the dark tunnel, a bearded man walked out. When he saw the little princess, his eyes were stunned for a moment. He came over and turned her face to look at her carefully. He even pulled out the rag in her mouth. Anyway, her limbs were weak and she was like a weak cat. Chukren. You dare to attack me? Imperial brother will kill you. She didn't expect this person to be an acquaintance. He was Lu Ye's prince. He was already in his 50s and he had married many young ladies. Chukren laughed. His voice was like a bell. He looked at Long Ting Shui and couldn't hide his desire. Bo Nana, you are the same as your brother and mother. Your heart is with the Han people. You even took a Han name. You didn't disgrace Liu Ye's name. But it doesn't matter now. You are going to die and your brother won't know that I did it. Long Ting Shui was naturally a smart girl. If she fell into their hands, she would definitely die. At this moment, she really hoped that Gong Yimo would appear and save her. At this time, another person appeared. He was thin and was clearly not on the same side as the tall Liu Yi. Don't talk nonsense. Kill her. Chukran was a little dissatisfied and said to that person, we are only temporarily cooperating. When can you order me around? I can do whatever I want. And now, I want to do her. His words scared Long Ting Shui so much that her face turned white. You are my uncle. Chukran unbuckled his belt and smiled obscenely. So what? Anyway, you are going to die. Why don't you give uncle a good time? The other black-clothed man saw that he couldn't stop them and frowned impatiently. He then got up and walked out, leaving the cave to Long Ting Shui and Chukran. Before he left, he even said, remember to kill me after using me. He didn't show any mercy. Long Ting Shui immediately fell into despair. No. Don't go. But she only shouted one sentence before she was slapped by Chukran. She covered her face. She was afraid, resentful, and most of all, regretful. Chapter 322. It would have been great if she hadn't run out. She didn't expect that someone had been watching her from the start. If she was still in the team, Gong Yimo would definitely protect her. But it was too late for regrets now. The other party's burly and ugly body was already pressing down on her. She didn't even have the strength to resist. At that moment, her eyes were filled with hatred. It was all Gong Yimo's fault. If she hadn't left, she wouldn't have wanted to take the opportunity to escape. If she had discovered that she was missing earlier and found her faster, she wouldn't be here being humiliated by this disgusting man. At this moment, she was flipped over and her hands and feet were tied. Her clothes were torn and she was about to be violated from behind. She was crying blood in her heart. She wished that the person being humiliated here was Gong Yimo. Gong Yimo was leading people to sneak into the ground. Her movements were very careful. Some of the people following her had been sent out by her to call for reinforcements. Most of them were sent out by her to do something else. So at this moment, she only brought a few people and sneaked in. The people in this mine must have been killed by the other party. But they would never have thought that because this was the first mine she left behind in Yuhing, she was more familiar with the layout of the mine than anyone else. So she bypassed the guards in front and sneaked in silently. At this moment, she was very anxious. No matter what Long Ting Shui's character was, she definitely couldn't die in her hands on this road. Finally, she heard a trace of sound. It's here. Gong Yimo gave a look to the people behind her and told them to do what she had instructed. Then, she walked alone in the direction of the sound. She didn't expect that there would be so many people gathered there. When Gong Yimo appeared, everyone unsheathed their weapons. She glanced over and realized that there were more than 200 people. She was stunned. There were so many guards in front, but there were still so many people here. The people hiding here were also stunned. Even if Gong Yimo was standing there alone, they felt that she was heavier than 1,000 pounds. There was no other way. As a citizen of Daiyu State, Gong Yimo's talents were like thunder to their ears. Moreover, she could sneak in without anyone noticing. Put down your weapons, I want to see your leader. Gong Yimo was the only one who could be so arrogant in a situation where she was outnumbered. Moreover, she didn't need anyone to announce her arrival. Her voice traveled very far in the cave. Not long after, a man in black stood out from behind the group of people who were eyeing her covetously. "It's you." Gong Yimo felt that it was really too easy to guess. It was actually Long Shangxiang's people, because the person who came was actually Li Ku. After not seeing him for a long time, Li Ku had become even thinner. His entire person was like a bamboo pole, and he no longer had the elegant demeanor of the past. He looked at his men with a gloomy expression, then looked at Gong Yimo who was all alone. He mocked, "Are you here to save someone? You alone?" He was not afraid that Gong Yimo would call for reinforcements. He had already explored this place. This mine was connected in all directions. He would be able to get out no matter what. Gong Yimo smiled. "I'm here to negotiate with you, brotherly." The two words, brotherly, made Li Ku tremble. However, he did not forget what he was here to do, so his expression became even scarier as he said, "Don't give me that. We have nothing to talk about. You're just one person, what right do you have to negotiate with me?" Gong Yimo smiled. "Originally, I didn't have the right. After all, you still have hostages in your hands." However, she took out a small bamboo tube. "Do you recognize this?" Li Ku's pupils shrank. Oh no, he actually forgot that Gong Yimo had such a powerful thing in her hands. However, he was sure that Gong Yimo would not dare to do so. He sneered. "Don't use this thing to scare me. Once you blow this place up, you won't be able to escape either. I don't believe that you're willing to die here with me." Gong Yimo did not expect him to be so quick-witted. She smiled again. "Do you know where the others who followed me went?" Hearing her words, everyone quieted down. "You guys are unlucky to have chosen the mine by the Thunder River. I built this mine single-handedly. In order to prevent fire and other problems, I specially set up a secret passage. As long as someone opens the sluice gate, the water from the Thunder River will rush in. The bomb in my hand is a signal. Believe it or not, I will definitely escape before the cave collapses, just like how I can silently walk here." Her words finally made Li Ku hesitate. He really wanted to catch the little princess, but it did not mean that he was willing to pay with his life. Now, both sides seemed to be at a strange equilibrium. Everyone had a trump card in their hands, so they were not willing to take a step back. Gong Yimo heaved a sigh of relief. Fortunately, they did not understand the situation and blindly believed in her. Otherwise, she really did not know how to stall for time. At this moment, everyone quieted down. Some subtle sounds became more obvious. That was Long Cheng's Ting Shue's voice. Gong Yimo's expression changed slightly. "What did you guys do to her?" At this moment, Li Ku seemed to have a trace of pleasure. She turned her body sideways and pointed to the tunnel behind her. "Why don't you go and see for yourself?" He hooked up a trace of evil smile. "From the sound of it, she seems to be enjoying it, right?" Gong Yimo's expression sank and she really walked behind him. During this process, she was unarmed and had to pass by 200 assassins alone. Gong Yimo raised the bomb and took large strides forward. That imposing manner seemed to be fearless. It caused the others to retreat instead, allowing her to smoothly walk into the crowd, and her speed was very fast. Li Ku glanced at her. She was always so bold and straightforward, but others would never be able to guess what she was going to do next. "Take her down." Almost at the same moment he gave the order. All the assassins moved, and Gong Yimo also moved. Li Ku thought that since Gong Yimo was deep in the crowd, she would certainly not be able to ignite the fire, so he used this method to lure her forward. Gong Yimo, on the other hand, was not aiming for the little princess from the beginning. She was aiming for Li Ku. To catch bandits, first catch the king. There were enemies in all directions, and the space was too small. Gong Yimo could not use her full power. She could only use the method of transforming her internal energy into armor. Then, she ignored the swords that were slashing in front of her and rushed in front of Li Ke like an arrow. The moment he retreated, she grabbed his collar. This moment was too fast. Even if her internal energy had transformed, it was not invincible. The blade still left countless wounds on her body. Although they were shallow, they still tore her clothes. In the 7 or 8 steps she took to rush in front of Li Ke, she received no less than 100 swords. But she succeeded. She endured the pain all over her body and grabbed Li Ke by the throat, pushing him in front of her. Li Ke was stunned. He had heard before that the transformation of internal energy could dissipate most of the strength of the enemy's swords. But when he saw so many swords slashing towards him, the pressure in his heart was not something an ordinary person could withstand. While enduring the threat of being torn to pieces, she could still move towards her goal without any change in expression. This person, Gong Yimo. Did she really have such a thing as fear in her heart? Chapter 323. However, he was destined to never get an answer. The winner takes all. He had fallen into Gong Yimo's hands. She dragged him and quickly retreated into the tunnel behind her. Gong Yimo saw that Li Ke's men did not put down their weapons even after she caught him. It was obvious that Li Ke was only the temporary leader. Although they did not retreat, they maintained a distance of 10 steps and followed her from afar, as long as they did not interfere with her. Long Cheng's Ting Shue's voice became clearer and clearer. Listening to the commotion, she was actually being violated. Gong Yimo pursed her lips. Just as she was about to rush in, she turned a corner and suddenly found a group of people waiting for her in another cave. Surprisingly, there were people from 2 countries. Lu Ye's standards were too obvious. Gong Yimo saw through it immediately. At this moment, Li Ke, who was in her hands, shouted. "Quickly kill the little princess. She's here to save people." Lu Ye's men panicked. They originally had a plan and did not want to kill the little princess now. However, when they heard Li Ke's warning, they quickly went in to report to Chakran. The people in the tunnel outside were all from Dai Yu State. The people in the tunnel in front were all from Lu Ye's men. The little princess was in the cave about 10 meters away from her. Gong Yimo decisively threw Li Ke towards Lu Ye's men. Then, she ignited the thing in her hands. In an instant, the fire was very dazzling. "Get down!" Someone shouted. The others had never seen such a thing before and instinctively lay down. This gave Gong Yimo a chance to rush into the cave. At this moment, Chakran had yet to get up. She immediately saw the tortured Long Cheng's Ting Shui. Outside, it was just a simple flare. It had no lethality at all. But at this time, everyone could hear the sound of something rushing above their heads. It was rumbling. Everyone had a bad premonition. Before anyone could subdue Gong Yimo, someone ran in a panic and shouted, "The water is coming. The water is flooding in." Gong Yimo did not care what was happening outside. She grabbed Chakran with one hand and said to Long Cheng's Ting Shui, "Get up. The cave is going to collapse." Long Cheng Ting Shui acted as if she didn't hear anything. She just hugged her body and looked at Gong Yimo with resentment. Why didn't she come earlier or later? Why did she have to come when she was being humiliated? She must have done it on purpose. However, how could Gong Yimo be in the mood to care about her? It was a mess outside. She grabbed Chakran with one hand and Long Ching Ting Snow with the other. Before anyone could react, she ran in a certain direction. Chakran was also shocked by the sudden noise. He wanted to struggle, but he saw a flood of water rushing out of the tunnel. He no longer dared to struggle and allowed Gong Yimo to grab him and run. He was even afraid that he would be too slow. Some people were slow to realize the situation, but they still followed Gong Yimo. Since she dared to throw the game, she must know the exit. This water release was too timely. Gong Yimo secretly gave her subordinate a thumbs up. By the time she ran over, she was already exhausted. She threw Chakran and Long Qingting Shui to the ground. Soon, people came forward to take the two away. Then Gong Yimo watched as the enemies came up one by one. She had to say that their reaction was too fast. Other than the unlucky people guarding the tunnel, most of the people she met earlier were not dead. Now that they saw Gong Yimo snatching Long Qingting Shui away, they all glared at her. The two sides confronted each other. At this time, Gong Yimo started to have a headache. Because the enemy outnumbered her by too much, and her reinforcements did not come. It seemed that she could only solve the problem through negotiation. What a pity. She originally wanted to capture the bearded man, but now it seemed that it was not possible. The bearded man was one of the leaders of the enemy. He could be used as a bargaining chip. At this time, Long Qingting Shui was covered with clothes by her own people and shivered. However, she glared at Gong Yimo with resentment. When Gong Yimo saw Li Ku come up, she could not help but sigh. Hey, now that the situation is like this, I think we can make a deal. Li Ku was soaked and embarrassed. He glanced at the little princess who was snatched away and the captive Chakran and smiled coldly. What do you want? Gong Yimo smiled and said, You see, now that the little princess has been rescued by me, you have no bargaining chips. But we still have a hostage. How about this, as long as you let us go, I will return this bearded man to you. I will not pursue today's matter. She could not pursue the matter even if she wanted to. At this time, she only had 60 people on her side, and most of them were the little princess's people. It was fine when the little princess was not here, but now that the little princess was here, they would not listen to her orders. The other side even took out their trump cards. Both sides added together did not die, and now there were hundreds of people. She could only admit defeat and hand over the hostage. Li Ku was also hesitating. Although he was unwilling, he did not have any bargaining chips. Even if he had more people than the other side, it was useless. After all, half of his people were Chakran's people. They definitely wanted to save their master, so the people he brought with him, against Gong Yimo, it was really difficult. Therefore, Li Ku thought for a while and was about to agree. But at this time, Long Qingting Shui spoke. She suddenly said to Li Ku and Chakran with a cold face. Kill Gong Yimo. As long as you kill her and send me back to the country, I will not pursue the matter of what you did to me today. Gong Yimo was stunned when she heard this. At this time, the imperial guards behind her quickly pointed their swords at Long Qingting Shui. The imperial guards only had 10 people, but Long Qingting Shui's people had more than 50 people. They shielded Long Qingting Shui behind them, afraid that Gong Yimo's people would hurt her. Gong Yimo did not expect the little princess to suddenly change sides. She did not expect that there would be someone who would rather cooperate with someone who humiliated her than obediently stay by the side of the person who saved her. Was there something wrong with her brain? Li Ku was also shocked and suspicious, but his brain was working quickly, thinking about the feasibility of her suggestion. Long Qingting Shui looked at the shocked Gong Yimo and sneered. Everyone here is your people and Lu Ye's people. Only Gong Yimo is our common enemy. You captured me just to cause chaos in the Daiyu state and seize the opportunity to seize power from the Crown Prince and Gong Dai. Instead of killing me, why don't you kill her? She is the one who will threaten you, the one who will cause chaos in the Daiyu state. She was indeed smart, but also very vicious. She grabbed her clothes and narrowed her eyes. Or, you don't have to kill her, but you can cripple her martial arts and humiliate her in front of everyone. It would be best if she could be ridden by thousands of people. I think the two most powerful men in the Daiyu state will go crazy when they see this scene. Chapter 324. Gong Yimou did not expect that Longqing Tingshue's intelligence would be used here. She had underestimated her enemy too much. She had made a good plan. First, she used Li Ku and Chakran's men to capture Gong Yimou. This way, Li Ku could easily achieve his mission of disrupting Daiyu state. Naturally, he would not let Longqing Tingxue die and cause a national disaster. Therefore, it was obvious that after capturing Gong Yimou, the two would work together to kill Chakran's men. At that time, Li Ku would bring Gong Yimou back to report, and she would bring Chakran back to Lu Yi. She would torture him to her heart's content and take revenge for her previous humiliation. It was a good idea to kill two birds with one stone. Unfortunately, this intelligence was used on how to harm others. After thinking about the whole story, Longqing Tingxue looked at Chakran. She suppressed her disgust and resentment and said to the bastard who had just humiliated her. Although you have done terrible things to me, as long as your men can help me capture Gong Yimou, I will forgive you. I won't pursue this matter. Yes, it's time to let bygones be bygones. You'll suffer later. On the other hand, Chakran saw that there were very few Tingxue players in Dragon City and that they posed no threat to him, so he agreed. He planned to capture Gong Yimou first, and then work with Li Ku to capture Tingxue in Dragon City. Both of them harbored ulterior motives and set their sights on Gong Yimou. Needless to say, Gong Yimou was disgusted by them. Li Ku's eyes flashed with a dangerous light. He did not care what these people were planning. As long as he could achieve his goal, it was enough. If that's the case, what are you waiting for? As soon as he said that, all the assassins got into formation and pointed their swords at each other. The 10 Imperial Guards on Gong Yimou's side also surrounded Gong Yimou and waited for her. Longqing Tingxue was a little proud. Her eyes flashed with a crazy light, as if putting Gong Yimou in a difficult situation was her greatest achievement and goal. Gong Yimou asked her, puzzled. Can I ask why? Gong Yimou was very curious about her brain circuit. Longqing Tingxue no longer had any scruples and said fiercely. You can only blame yourself for stealing Gong Dai. He is your brother. You still did such a despicable thing. Since you are so shameless, I will teach you a lesson myself. Gong Yimou did not expect that Gong Dai was involved in this. She knew that Longqing Tingxue seemed to be interested in him, but it was not to this extent. Could it be that there was a past that she did not know about? She didn't care anymore. What she wanted to do was her business. Now, she moved her slightly sore arms and stood up. She looked around and snorted coldly. You want to take me down with just people? That's too wishful thinking. However, Li Ku laughed. Originally, it wouldn't have worked. However, the blades of my men have been stained with temporary poison. After seeing blood, it will cause their flesh to ache and they won't be able to exert any strength. In the beginning, if it was only my men, I wouldn't have dared to fight you head-on. But now, you have no outside help and no bargaining chips. I want to see if you can last longer, or if I have more men. At this time, Gong Yimou's expression became a little serious. Because Longqing Tingshue's people had released Chakran, she was now fighting 1 against 3. Longqing Tingxue laughed loudly. Gong Yimou. You also have a day like this. Do it. In an instant, the enemies surrounded them from all directions. In an instant, they engaged in battle. Unknowingly, a layer of river water came out from the mine, mixed with mud and sand, slightly hindering their movements. Gong Yimou listened to Longqing Tingshue's wanton laughter and felt her scalp tingle. Her hands were getting heavier and heavier, making her heart somewhat heavy. At this time, what should she do to break through the encirclement? At this time, the Imperial Guard beside her quickly said, "Princess, don't worry about us, we will cover you and leave first." Gong Yimo was stunned. She saw that each of them, in order to protect her, their eyes were filled with the will to die. She had never done anything like abandoning her comrades in her previous life. Let alone in this life. She had to think of a way. What else could she use in her space? There must be a way. The situation was getting more and more urgent. The enemy had too many people, making Gong Yimo unable to take care of herself. "Princess, you should go. You can only avenge us if you live." Not knowing who shouted, Gong Yimo turned around and saw that person being hacked to death. At that moment, her eyes suddenly became bloodshot, tainted with a trace of killing intent. At this time, suddenly, a rain of arrows fell from the sky, instantly covering half the sky. The rain of arrows seemed to have eyes, not injuring Gong Yimo's people at all, while the others fell to the ground, dead. Who was it? Who was it? They actually had such a terrifying fighting strength. They instantly tore a hole in a difficult situation. Just as everyone raised their heads to look, another rain of arrows covered the sky. This time, it almost covered the entire battlefield. Seeing the people around her fall one by one, Gong Yimo's people stopped. They were in the middle of it all, but they were not affected at all. Gong Yimo raised her head, the sky was covered with arrows, the sound of the arrows piercing through the air, and the screams of the enemies around her. She stood there, strangely feeling a trace of gentleness. It's Gong Dai. Suddenly, numerous archers appeared on all four sides of the hill. A person on a horse stood in front, his cold eyes instantly softened when he saw Gong Yimo. He also heaved a sigh of relief. Luckily, he was in time. Gong Dai. Everyone present was stunned. They did not expect to see Gong Dai in such a place. Hearing this, Long Cheng's snow-white face turned pale. At this time, her clothes were disheveled and she subconsciously hid behind the people who were still alive. Li Ku had not recovered from the panic of losing half of his men in an instant, when he was shocked by Gong Dai's appearance. He rode his horse and approached with large strides. His face was frosty and his skin was as white as snow. However, he wore a black robe that was filled with killing intent. White and black clashed together, his beauty was threatening and impactful. At this time, he was riding his majestic blood-sweat horse. The ground was littered with corpses and arrows, as well as the blood-stained muddy water. This hellish scene was mercilessly trampled by the horse's hooves, causing blood to splatter everywhere. Fear. So much so that the people who were still alive did not dare to move, as they watched him ride his horse towards Gong Yimo. This man, once he appeared, he caused a river of blood to flow. He did not say a word, but those people's faces were filled with fear and panic. A demon god. But at this moment, Gong Yimo felt that he could not be any gentler, no worse than a prince riding a white horse. Gong Yimo stood there, slightly gasping for breath. At this time, her hair was stuck to her forehead and her body was wounded. She certainly looked ugly. "Why are you here?" Gong Yimo's tone was slightly surprised. The moment she spoke, all the enemies who were still alive were all controlled by Gong Dai's men. One person controlling the entire battlefield, this was probably the atmosphere. Chapter 325. Gong Dai jumped off his horse and looked at Gong Yimo's sorry state. His eyes flashed with heartache and disapproval. He walked a few steps to Gong Yimo's side, as if they were a couple. He took out a handkerchief and wiped Gong Yimo's face. As he wiped, he used his special cold voice to say softly, "When I was in the country, I noticed that the Long family was acting strangely, so I followed them here. Fortunately, you're fine." Gong Yimo took his handkerchief in embarrassment and wiped her face. "Thank you very much." Gong Dai narrowed his eyes and smiled. "Royal sister, do you really want to thank me?" When he smiled, the entire valley seemed to fall silent for a moment. Most of the people had never seen Gong Dai smile, and even more were shocked. Longqing Shui looked at him in a daze. This was the man she had liked for many years, but now he was treating another woman as if there was no one else around. Moreover, it was his sister. Why couldn't she be the only one who could overturn the world? Li Ku was the first to react. He said, "Gong Dai, how dare you be so sweet in front of so many people? Do you really think that the Daiyu state is your own Daiyu state?" Gong Dai glanced at him indifferently. Immediately, someone came forward and tied him up and gagged him. "Royal sister, you haven't said whether you want to thank me or not." Gong Dai turned his head and continued to tease Royal sister with a smile. Feeling the burning gazes from all around, Gong Yimo glared at him fiercely. She said fiercely, "Shut up." There were so many outsiders here. Could he restrain himself a little? Her glare shocked many outsiders who didn't know how they interacted with each other. It was rumored that Gong Dai was as cold as ice, and that he would seek revenge for the smallest grievance. His methods were vicious. They didn't expect that there would be someone who could glare at him so openly and even scold him. He was actually happy and not angry. Longqing Shui couldn't hold it in anymore and said loudly, "Ha! Look at that." She even said that this consort was slandering her. Look at her. Do you dare to say that she didn't seduce her brother? No secret communication. What chastity mark? It must be fake. Upon hearing this, Gong Dai's calm and tranquil temperament was swept away. In an instant, he became violent. With this change, his subordinates instantly brought Longqing Shui over and kicked her, wanting her to kneel down. She was willing to kneel in front of Gong Dai, but with Gong Yimo, she would rather die than do that. Unfortunately, she was pinned down and could not move. She could only kneel down and stare at Gong Yimo with resentment. "Royal sister, this woman is too noisy. It's better to kill her." When he said the word kill, it was as if the person he wanted to kill was not a princess of a country, but an ant that was not worth mentioning. Gong Ju's words deeply hurt Longqing Shui. Her eyes burst with hatred, but also with deep pain. She liked him so much and did so many things for him, but why didn't he even look at her? Why did he want to kill her so easily? "Gong Dai. Why are you treating me like this? I like you so much. Why don't you like me? Do you know how long I've liked you?" Gong Dai looked at her. That look was extremely cold and had a trace of killing intent. "What does it have to do with me?" He actually said that her liking had nothing to do with him. Longqing Shui was stunned and then laughed out loud. Then, she suddenly unbuttoned her clothes. She didn't care that there were so many people present. She just looked at Gong Dai deeply and persistently. She even revealed her naked upper body. The moment she unbuttoned her clothes, Gong Yimo thought that she had gone crazy. "Gong Dai. Look at me. How am I inferior to this slut?" The cold wind blew on her exposed skin, causing her to shiver. At this moment, Gong Dai suddenly covered Gong Yimo's eyes. "Don't look," he said softly. Gong Yimo's eyes were covered by him. She stood there in a daze. Her red lips were slightly opened as if she was silently inviting him. Gong Dai naturally wouldn't refuse. Therefore, in front of everyone present, and even in front of Longqing Shui, he kissed Gong Yimo's lips with slight urgency. At that moment, the world seemed to have quieted down. Long Qingting Shui knelt on the ground. After unbuttoning her clothes, her entire upper body was naked, so she was very cold. But this cold was far from the coldness in her heart. Gong Dai. He actually kissed Gong Yimo in front of everyone. Everyone stared with their eyes wide open in disbelief. There were so many rumors that had been quelled, revived, and quelled again. It wasn't without reason. Gong Dai really liked Gong Yimo. The siblings were really, at that moment, Gong Yimo was stunned. Her brain buzzed and finally went blank. Her eyes were covered, which made her senses even more sensitive. She could feel Gong Ju's soft lips, the faint refreshing fragrance of his body, and the lingering longing under his light touch. They had only been apart for a few days, but she felt as if years had passed. Gong Yimo wanted to push Gong Dai away, but she didn't know if it was because of the drug, but her hands were powerless. Under such circumstances, she was kissed by Gong Dai for a long time. Their breaths intertwined, and their heartbeats were slightly erratic. Finally, he pressed her head on his shoulder and announced to the world. I, Gong Dai, only belong to royal sister. Gong Yimo's ears were pressed against his chest. The thumping sound made her dizzy. At that moment, she actually forgot that she should be pushing him away. How could he say such words in front of the world? Long Qingting Shui looked up and could only see the couple hugging each other. That was the biggest mockery of her actions. She undressed, but he ignored her. It was as if he was avoiding the plague. Was he afraid of hurting Gong Yimo's eyes? At this moment, more people came from afar. There were quite a few of them, and they were all Long Qingting Shui's people. They finally got the news and rushed over, but they were too late. At this moment, Buji saw his princess kneeling in front of Gong Dai with disheveled clothes and was immediately furious. What did you do? How dare you humiliate me, Lu Yi? He wanted to rush in with his people, but he was stopped by the imperial guards. Gong Dai was really impatient with their noise and asked softly. Royal sister, how do you want to deal with this woman? He didn't even look at Long Qingting Shui and only looked at Gong Yimo. Gong Yimo was still a little confused. She glanced at Long Qingting Shui and finally sighed. She definitely can't die in my hands. At least, she can't die on this road. Why not? Gong Dai raised his eyebrows slightly. He smiled and tidied her hair, but the words he said were very cruel. As long as royal sister is willing, I will let her marry any old man. After the old man dies, I will drag her to the grave with him. I guarantee that she will no longer be an eyesore to you. His voice wasn't loud, but the people nearby heard it clearly. Long Qingting Shui's face turned pale and she almost fainted. Gong Yimo shook her head. If Gong Dai really did that, he would have to bear the pressure of 2 countries for her. She didn't want to cause trouble for Gong Dai for her own selfish reasons. No, I will continue to take her to Lu Yi. Don't worry. I can deal with her. Chapter 326. Gong Yimo's words made Gong Dai very disappointed. He just didn't want Gong Yimo to go to Lu Yi. She would be gone for so long, he would miss her a lot. However, Gong Yimo didn't realize this and patted his shoulder. Thank you for being so considerate of me. Don't worry, I can do it. Gong Dai was about to speak when Buji angrily said. You've gone too far. You've gone too far. Not only did you humiliate the princess, you also kidnapped my Prince of Lu Yi. What are you trying to do? I must report this to my king. I will make you pay for this. Buji also saw Chukran. Although he was curious as to why he was here and was restrained by Gong Dai's men, this made him even angrier. Since Gong Yimo had already made up her mind, Gong Dai would naturally respect her even if he didn't want to. Thus, when he saw Buji misunderstand, he frowned impatiently and waved his hand lightly. The Imperial Guards received the order and pushed the Lu Yi men that Gong Yimo brought over to Buji. More than 40 people died, and now there were less than 10 left. Thus, they were very afraid of Gong Dai and quickly ran to Buji's side. Gong Dai coldly said, "Tell him what happened just now. What did this Lu Yi prince do?" With Gong Dai's order, the Lu Yi men who survived the chaos didn't dare to hide anything and quickly told Buji everything. For example, how did Gong Yimo bring them to rescue the princess, and how the people who kidnapped the princess were their Lu Yi prince and that person from Dayu state. For example, how the princess was violated by their prince. Also, after the princess was released, she suddenly changed sides and wanted to join forces with the people who kidnapped her to deal with Gong Yimo. Finally, this Dayu State's Prince Qi suddenly appeared and took control of the situation. Then, Prince Qi wanted to kill the princess, but Gong Yimo didn't agree and so on. When Buji heard this, he turned pale with fright. He glanced at the disheveled Lu Yi prince who was kneeling on the ground and then looked at the half-naked princess. He only felt the blood in his heart churning. He felt as if his old face was about to be completely thrown away by her. Buji's 3 values were still very upright, so he felt ashamed to show his face. However, he still had to solve the problem in front of him. So he held back the urge to vomit blood and knelt before Gong Dai and begged. "Great you, King Qi, please forgive me. I was too impulsive just now. Now, since your country's first princess is still willing to send us back to our country, I hope that King Qi will hand my country's prince over to me. I will definitely bring him back to admit his guilt and receive the punishment he deserves." In fact, Gong Dai had also decided to do so. Since the royal sister was unwilling to go back, he could only bring Li Ke back to deal with imperial concubine Long and the others. As for the little princess and that Prince Lu Yi, he would naturally hand them over to the royal sister to deal with. Perhaps after this battle, the royal sister would be able to relax a little when she arrived at Lu Yi. He glanced at Gong Yimo. Gong Yimo nodded. Gong Dai sighed silently. With a wave of his hand, the people holding down Ting Shui and Chakran released their hands. Both of them stood up. Gong Yimo rubbed her nose. "Since that's the case, I still have to hurry. I'll leave first." Gong Dai suddenly stepped forward and blocked her path. "Royal sister, you just said that you wanted to thank me." He was acting shamelessly. Gong Yimo was a little overwhelmed. While she was in a daze, Gong Dai quickly kissed her forehead. He sighed softly. "Remember, you owe me a thank you. When you come back, I will ask for it." Gong Yimo subconsciously took a step back, but he caught her hand and placed a bottle of medicine in her palm. "Although you have a lot of medicine, but don't let me see you injured every time I see you." He looked at her torn clothes and the faint traces of blood. His eyes flashed with heartache and a trace of suppressed madness. "If you let me see you injured again, I'm really afraid that I won't be able to control myself and lock you up. So that you won't run around anymore." He lowered his voice so only Gong Yimo could hear. At that moment, Gong Dai's serious tone made her feel that Gong Dai would really do that. Seeing her frightened and looking at him with a dazed little face, Gong Dai really felt defeated. He couldn't say a single harsh word and could only stroke her hair. "Don't make me worry again." No one dared to say anything about this intimacy. Only Long Cheng's Ting Shui suddenly laughed coldly. She put on her clothes again and looked at the couple in front of her. Her eyes flashed with hatred. One day, she'll sell Gong Emo to the lowest brothel in the world. She also wanted Gong Dai to kneel on the ground and beg for her favor. With that thought, she laughed and walked towards Boogie. Anyway, Gong Dai had already promised Gong Yimo that he wouldn't kill her. She had nothing to be afraid of. "Let's go," she said gloomily to Boogie. "This." Boogie looked at Gong Dai and then looked at Gong Yimo. He was a little hesitant. His expression made Long Cheng's Ting Shue's eyes flash with killing intent. Then, she ignored him and left on her own. Gong Yimo waved at him. Only then did Boogie leave with his men. Holding the medicine bottle, she said to Gong Dai in embarrassment, "Then I'll leave too." Gong Dai looked at her deeply for a while before nodding. "Take care of yourself," Gong Yimo promised again and again. Then, she led the rest of the people and left with Chakran. Watching her leave, Gong Ju suddenly felt as if he had been chasing after her all this time. The person he liked had the strongest mind and the broadest heart in the world. That was why he was willing to chase after her. He couldn't help but like her. "Take care of yourself because your body is mine. Your heart is also mine. My royal sister." When Gong Yimo returned to the team, Long Cheng's Ting Shui had already returned to the carriage. Gong Yimo was too lazy to care about her. Out of sight, out of mind. It wasn't that she didn't want to trouble Long Cheng's Ting Shui, but she really needed to clean up the wounds on her body. Also, Chakran was also a trump card. She needed to watch over him strictly. Soon, the team drove all the way to the border of Yuheng. At this time, the grass was already yellow. Looking north, there was no end in sight. At this speed, they would soon reach Luyi. The closer they got to Luyi, the more guilty the people of Luyi felt. They had let down the king of Luyi. So when they reached the door, they didn't dare to approach. The team started to set up camp. The bonfire slowly rose. Gong Yimo sat by the fire to expel the chill from her body. In her hand was the meat roasted by her subordinates. Eating in this kind of environment, it had a different flavor. But at this time, a burst of screams came, disturbing her mood. Recently, Long Cheng's Ting Shui didn't dare to do anything. But that was only in front of Gong Yimo. Facing Lu Ye's people, especially the maids by her side, she really didn't hold back when tormenting them. But this was other people's family matter. It wasn't good for her to interfere. But the noise in her ears grew louder and louder. Gong Yimo frowned slightly and endured it. "You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.